Hey, do you like coffee? Because if you do, what you should do is go to blackriflecoffee.com. They're an amazing brand founded by amazing people, and they certainly have been helping support the podcast for quite some time. And this episode and all future episodes are going to be brought to you by them, so get used to it. And if you go to their website right now, blackriflecoffee.com, a little bit non sequitur, it's the return of Article 15, a limited release of apparel. And if you haven't heard of Article 15, I would look into it. It was a brand that was started long ago by some of the founders of Black Rifle. They make some pretty cool shirts all around the military theme, I will say. And if you're not interested in that, but you still like coffee, well, then you can go to town. You can get a coffee subscription, you can get a coffee mug, you can get a coffee shirt or coffee hat, and everything in between. blackriflecoffee.com. And that's it. So let's talk about my guest today. His name is Matthew Reed. He, broadly, I'm going to describe it as, comes from the intelligence world. The N2, S2, if you are a military enthusiast or were in the military. And I was incredibly happy that he reached out to sit down with me because most of my experience is from the N3 or S3 or J3 world, which is operations. I worked with the guys that I was on target with, but guess how we got to the target? I mean, obviously it was on like helicopters and stuff like that, but I mean actually how we identified the targets largely is based off of the intelligence. So Mr. Reed comes from that world. He was an interrogator for a bit, which was kind of fascinating. Discussed that. And since his time in the intelligence industry, which we talk about plenty, he has continued on as an author. And he discusses his books at length. So I'm going to shut up and let Matt speak for himself. Episode 242 with Matthew Reed. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
The most burning question I have for you, no pun intended, is how do you live in Texas in the months? What was the temperature when you left?
Oh, dear Lord. So exactly my point. So when I left, it would be about 108 degrees Fahrenheit at 8:30 at night. And that's with an incredibly high humidity.
Why? Why do you hate yourself?
Well, I've grown up with it now. You would think I would have gotten acclimated to it, but even though I grew up with it, it sometimes does get to me, and I got to stop doing some of the things I'm doing, just drink a lot of water.
Yeah. I figure your outdoor activity times are very limited. So you're saying it's 108 at 8:30?
Yes, sir.
Early morning, what's the temperature you're waking up to? It's got to be 80s, 90s?
So usually in the 80s, 90s range. That's usually when I get up to go run.
Yeah.
And when I get up to go run, it's not that the temperature is bad, but because you're there in southeast Texas, you're kind of close to the coast and marshy areas, and so the humidity is what gets you. Like, I'll go running, and the heat's not that bad. The sun's just barely even out. But when I come back, it feels like I just jumped into a swimming pool.
You know what's awesome about running? Absolutely fucking nothing. Why do you do that to yourself?
Well, I tell you, I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy, so the old-fashioned PT methods I learned in the Marine Corps and the Army, I kind of stick with those just because they're simple and they work.
Yeah.
And I always said, as one of my drill instructors once said, I'm not going to let myself ever become a food blister.
That's a good description, actually. That is a good description. I'm stoked that you reached out because, with my military background, I have a lot of friends who I worked directly with in the N3 category of, N1 through N9 being in the Navy. What is it in the Army and the Marine Corps? Because we have N1 through N9. What do you guys have?
You talking about the ranking system?
Not the ranking system, but like the operational departments. Like N2 was Intel for us.
Oh, sure.
Or J2 in the joint world. What does the Marine Corps call it?
So I wasn't Intel in the Marine Corps. I went in Intel when I switched over and went in the Army. I had a break-in service. Yeah. But in both the Marine Corps and the Army, it's usually called S2.
S2, there you
up
go.
Up to G2. Okay.
Point being, I have a ton of friends who would be in the S3 or the N3 operational billets, but I still maintain some friendships from people from like the N2 or Intel world. But to be able to sit down and actually talk to somebody about the Intel space, how you guys do your job, actually what your job is, Like I said, I'm very glad that you reached out because it's not common that I get to sit down and talk with those types of individuals. Everybody wants to talk about what happens on target, which can be exciting sometimes, but as you well know, is largely boring. The term dry hole, I think, probably exists in the Marine Corps and the Army. And for the listeners, that means you show up somewhere expecting something and it's like, hey, I see one goat and two cows. Or
happens quite a bit.
We found Abu Smith. Or Abu or Ahmed, whatever. And it's just like, yeah, it's John Smith. And that's his neighbor's name too. And also across the street, it's the same guy. And he's wondering what we're doing here. So send the helicopters back.
Yeah. Well, that kind of stuff played out quite a bit when I was, in fact, when I was in the Army, I was deployed in 2000. That was my first tour as an interrogator at FOB Warhorse. You know, those types of things tended to play out when we would do our interrogations or we're running our human intelligence source operations. They would sometimes give us good information in a lot of cases, but it might be something, okay, this bad guy, okay, what's his name? What does he look like? We put that in the reports. They're like, well, mister, his name is Mohammed and he have beard.
Yeah. I launched on targets before with the deck that we would have, and it would be in a football sleeve, and the picture was actually a black silhouette. That's how much information. I'm not joking.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
I would draw some like mustache or a goatee on there. Literally in the name, I said Abu Smith, but I forget the Iraqi and Afghan name for basically John Smith. It's so, doesn't Abu mean son of, something like that? Yeah.
It does.
And sometimes we would go out there and we would know so little. And we would have generally a SIM card number off the phone and then a fucking silhouette picture. And just because I'm me, I would just hold it up and look at people and be like, nope, that's not him. What led you to military service? So you're born and raised in Texas, I'm assuming?
Yes, sir.
I was going to say I caught a little bit of a draw there.
It used to be a lot thicker. All the years working overseas has kind of taken some of that out of me.
Yeah.
But so summary of my life, I was born in Houston, Texas, 1979. 81, my dad's job took him to Louisiana for 4 years. Then we moved back to Tomball, Texas, which is pretty much where I grew up. That was in the summer of 85. But as I was going through even middle school, my grandfather was a successful small businessman. He was a decorated World War II veteran. He was a tail gunner on a B-25. And one of those guys was self-educated, read lots of books, probably could have debated with history PhDs, and the man was just that knowledgeable and smart.
But not through traditional methods. He taught himself?
No, sir, taught himself.
Yeah.
And he pushed reading military history to me. I got really into particularly the Roman Empire, the Roman legions. It's so fascinating. And I thought, my father was a Vietnam vet in the Marine Corps, Vietnam Tet Offensive, so service to country was something that was properly pushed as being important. This was obviously during the Cold War when we were facing down the Soviets, and of course everybody still thought we may have to fight these guys one day. And so that was emphasized to both me and my younger brother Jonathan. So that plus reading about the Roman legions, kind of thinking to myself, what would it have been like to be one of those soldiers, where it was infantry, cavalry, artillery, whatever, fighting from Britannia to Parthia? How could you get that kind of experience? So I went to college, got a degree in history at the University of St. Thomas, went into the Marine Corps, enlisted, did not go officer. I got out after 4 years, went back to Houston.
Was it the Legion experience that you were looking for?
Well, maybe it was. It wasn't that. I can tell you it wasn't. It was definitely not the Roman legions.
I don't know if that life would have been that awesome. I think some things viewed through the rear view mirror and maybe you can church it up a little bit with the language that you use. Like, don't get me wrong. I think those individuals lived up to every letter and every ounce of the warriors that they are described as. But I'm not so sure quality of life was that high. Fighting with fucking swords. My personal principle was nobody should ever get within touching distance of me. I can't imagine going just hacking at people with a 4-foot-long bladed weapon, let alone a dude charging at me with a horse or arrows. That would suck. Or, I don't know, if the actual flying, like the trebuchet balls actually existed. I hope they did because they're amazing.
They did. The Romans had different versions of them. They had the ballista that, they would sling out these lead balls, but they would core holes in them, so they made a whistling sound. It was kind of
early psyops.
Warfare. It's basically what it was. The Romans were masters. That's what crucifixion was used for when Marcus Crassus crucified the Spartacus revolters on the Appian Way. But
you know what else they didn't have? Good medical care.
Compared to us, yeah.
Compared to you look at the number of people who have survived the modern day battlefields, specifically Iraq and Afghanistan. You start looking at double amputees or triple or quadruple amputees. I think mathematically it's drastically higher than it has been in any other previous military engagement because the battlefield medicine is continuing to evolve.
Well, that's where there's some misconceptions about how advanced the Romans really were in their military medical care. So about 20-something years ago, it was after the movie Gladiator came out. I think the Catholic Church started...
Was that not a documentary?
Oh, no. Good movie, though. But the Catholic Church has released a lot of its archives. They held a lot of the true historical knowledge of the Roman legions. Now, when the Western Roman Empire fell, it was almost apocalyptic. Thousands of years of scientific and medical knowledge just evaporates overnight, and that knowledge was actually held by the Roman army, the legions. When we look back now, they were surprisingly sophisticated. They knew how to disinfect wounds. They were very ruthless about how they sterilized their medical tools. They had surgical masks they could wear and soak with something similar to alcohol. Their battlefield care for its time was remarkably good, probably better than what we had in the Civil War if you look at how many of the guys that were wounded survived.
Yeah.
And what happened when the Western Roman Empire finally collapses, it'd be like a nuclear warfare apocalypse in our time. What restarted technology was around 900 AD in the Dark Ages. The French went digging around some old Roman army forts. They found pieces of Roman army engineering manuals that were written in Latin. Well, they had a Catholic country. They could translate the Latin. That's kind of what helped us restart our technology going back the other way.
Is it crazy how that could just get lost over time?
It absolutely is. It's one of the core problems that contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire. When we try to figure out what the core problem was, you see near the end of the 3rd century AD, they started having one serious problem they could not mitigate, and that was military service went out of style. They could not get anywhere near enough citizens to continue to volunteer and serve in the legions. Draft was too unpopular, so what do they have to do? The military starts degrading. The NCO Corps starts to vanish. All that knowledge and tactical expertise goes away, and they start having to take in massive numbers of unassimilated barbarians to use as mercenaries because they don't have enough citizens to serve. And when you trace it back, almost everything that happened after the 3rd century AD, they had come back from a near-death experience. Emperors Gallienus and Aurelian, two of the toughest military commanders the world's ever seen, with a quarter of the Roman army beat back a nation of Goths, probably killed a couple million of them total over the years. They rose back, and they kind of almost reached another apex, like they always did, coming back hard. But then they couldn't get enough people to serve in the army, and that was where the slow disintegration happened. Now they couldn't fight off the migrating tribes of barbarians. They had to depend on them to be mercenaries. The equivalent would now be, imagine if we didn't have an ocean separating us and the Middle East. And then
we're very lucky that we have both the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean separating our country. Yeah.
If we didn't have that, imagine a scenario maybe 100 years from now, we can't get enough citizens to serve in the military. But
it doesn't need to be 100 years from now. I think we're at modern day.
Probably. And then imagine if we
not to interrupt you, sorry. You've heard, the amount of waivers that they're issuing now.
Yes, sir.
Whether it be criminal background, substance usage, and some of the substances I could really give a shit whether or not people are using those. I do care about the felonious background, depending on what it may be.
Yes, sir. I do too.
Deviation from standard or degradation from standard. I don't think it's an unknown template as to what happens when you go down that path.
Oh, it is. The Romans, that was what slowly started them down that path. And if we didn't have an ocean separating us, imagine if we got to a point where we had to bring in places full of ISIS fighters to use as mercenaries. That was kind of the situation the Romans slowly started to find themselves in. And the recruiting problem, I mean, it's multi-layered. One of the biggest problems is I think 3/4 of the guys who walk through the door for any of the branches of service are almost automatically disqualified for being morbidly obese.
People don't realize it's harder to get into the military actually than an Ivy League college.
They don't know that, but it's true.
Yeah. It's a sad state of affairs, and I also feel like intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know which one it is, I almost feel like the desire to serve your country has a negative connotation in some circles. And it is not, for me, when I was young, and I came from a military family, but be honest, they were not probably very pro me serving in the military. Both my mom and dad, came together from military families, and my dad's experience in Vietnam was rough, as I bet your father's experience
Oh, it was.
in Vietnam was rough. So they probably didn't want the next generation to continue to serve, but it was always something that was spoke of with honor and reverence. And I'm not saying that everybody in the United States has gone the opposite direction from that, but I hear it more often than not now. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to be in the military? Why would you want to work for corrupt politicians? And I can see how those breadcrumbs, people can put those breadcrumbs down, but I don't know. To me, it was beyond the politician. I was, serving the country or trying to do something for this, citizens to my left and right who maybe didn't want to or they couldn't, but I wanted to be able to do it so I could. It worries me when the thought of military service or service in general beyond yourself, greater than yourself, is viewed as something that's not worth your time anymore.
Well, that's a very good point to bring up. This is where we can draw a contrast between how the Romans did things and how we started doing things post-World War II. And one of the core problems we have in our country that leads to things like lack of accountability or going to war without a clear strategic objective.
We've never done that.
Well, of course
We've
not.
never done that in the past week.
Yeah. But it's something that was articulated, I think, well and given form by a writer named Nassim Taleb. He wrote a book called No Skin in the Game. Now, people may think, okay, where am I getting with this? Well, the problem that you were describing, I think, started with the upper classes after post-World War II and in Vietnam. Up through World War II, our political class, congressmen, senators, senior civil servants, diplomats, most of them did have sons in the military when World War II started up. Like
A direct connection to it.
Yes, sir. They may have served as pilots or intel officers or, artillery officers. They weren't always necessarily in infantry, but a lot of them were. They had that connection. And so what it gave them was, whether it was a CEO of a multi-million-dollar firm, defense firm, industrial firm, Wall Street, or a congressman or senator, a case in point, Franklin Roosevelt, his sons were serving line officers in the Marine Corps in the Pacific. So he and Eleanor Roosevelt had skin in the game. So did most people back then. And that was actually kind of like the Roman system. You remember, the Romans had a fairly stratified society that to us almost looks like it must be mean and oppressive somehow. But what they forget is Roman senators, before they could start their political careers, many of them had to start as tribunes in the Roman army, infantry or cavalry or sometimes artillery. And in warfare back then, that meant you hacked people to death with a sword come hell or high water.
Yeah.
You had what allowed you to run and rule over the plebs, the lower classes, is you could say, I led their children in battle. And when Roman senators wanted to start a war, say Senator Aulus Plautius when he took the legions to Great Britain, besides the fact that he had to get funding for it, the Roman aristocrats would have to put forth their own personal money to invest in the conquest. There's some financial skin in the game there. They had to go out there for years at a time, and if they were incompetent or stupid, they lost the battle and just got mutilated or dismembered or got head put on a pike or whatever. So when you have a system like that where these upper classes that are the policy makers and the rulers, when they've got skin in the game, I can promise you they're more circumspect about what they do, and when they do decide to execute a military action, the Romans up until the late 3rd century never deviated from one formula. You figure out, what do you want to accomplish? Why are we doing this? What is the objective? We used to call this commander's intent. Mm-hmm. The Romans would, in the Republican era, call it the will of the Senate or the emperor's will is their version of commander's intent. And they never stepped off the first legionary until they had figured that out. They had a clear objective, and they would wage total war and apply overwhelming force to achieve that objective as fast as possible, and had skin in the game. In World War II, that's one of the factors I think was important in our success that doesn't get talked about much. Case in point I'll use, for a lot of soldiers and Marines that are on guard duty, something that commonly dealt with was, you got a car or a truck coming towards you. Okay, it's riding low on the springs. Mm-hmm. You got maybe a couple seconds at most to make a decision. And is that because it's a lot of family with a lot of luggage, or is it a bomb? You hesitate, you might get blown up or get your legs blown up. One Marine corporal hesitated because he had a female suicide bomber come up to him. She had a thin face, but she was fat. He was afraid of being tried for war crimes, for example, under the rules of engagement, so he hesitated. Had that type of been experienced by the sons and daughters of, say, our political class, it wouldn't have lasted too long. It wouldn't fix everything, but we would make a lot fewer mistakes, probably go to war less often, and when we did, we would probably want to get a clear objective and get it over with as fast as possible.
I look at it from my own perspective of having 3 children. My oldest son now is of age where the draft would impact him. My middle son turns 17 next month, so he's right around the corner. My daughter is a teenager now, so a few more years. But all you really need to imagine for anybody who wants to have this thought experiment is 2 different scenarios. Scenario A is you are going to take a military action, but everybody involved in that military action has no real direct connection to you. They're not your sons, they're not your daughters. And you can kind of just look at the end state you want and say, yeah, go ahead and action that. Scenario B is one of your kids is going to be involved in that military action. Maybe more than one of your kids, maybe directly involved. And as a parent, I can tell you right fucking now, my thought process changes.
Oh, absolutely. It changes like that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that's the solution to all of this, but I do like the concept of having that skin in the game. I really think that a lot of decisions would have been made differently, and it's of course easier to say looking in the rearview mirror, if the people making those decisions had some way, shape, or form, even an incremental amount of direct connection to the impact that could come from them.
Well, it goes to another point. I don't know if you know who Gustav Hasford was. He was a real life private joker.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but I'm an idiot and I don't know that much about history, so you can throw out a bunch of names and I am not going to know them.
No worries. Just stop me if I do. But Gus Hasford, he wrote a book called The Short Timers about his time as a Marine in Vietnam in the Battle of Hue City, and then afterwards the siege of Khe Sanh. It was made into Full Metal Jacket.
Okay. Fantastic movie, by the way.
It was.
And as somebody who went through Marine Corps boot camp, I have been told that it's probably the most accurate description of a Marine Corps boot camp environment and drill instructor.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Which shouldn't be shocking because the actor was a Marine Corps drill instructor.
Harley Ermy. Yeah. But Gus Hasford said something. He used to write some articles for Penthouse magazine back in the 80s. It was after the movie came out, and people were seeking him out. Talk to him.
I've never heard of this magazine. What is it about?
It's got great articles, That's what everybody buys it for. But he wrote an article looking back on his time in Vietnam, and he was how to say this? He was a tortured soul. It was
before or after?
It seems like both before and after enduring. He was a really interesting guy. Did become a combat correspondent, and it was like his comedic exterior that earned him that nickname. It was almost as if that was a front for just a real melancholy nature.
Could have been a coping mechanism.
Yes, sir. Very well. He came from a poor farming family, possibly. He probably had a kind of a rough childhood, I believe. Great man, but in one article he said something, and he said they're talking about people in the news are talking about going to war with Russia, for example, and some senator getting up and banging his fist, talking all tough. And Gus Hasford says, well, it never ceases to amaze me how brave those in power are willing to be with someone else's sons and daughters.
Yeah, true statement.
Well, that stuck with me when he said that.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement. I think it would make a difference. How do we change that? I'm not so sure. There are a lot of people with military service who are running for office right now, but I also don't know. And I always caution people, I on Fridays I'll do Q&A, and I recently just got asked, I guess there's like 8 or 9 ex-SEALs running for office. I think the experience is great, but I will always caveat it with just because they had that experience doesn't mean they'd necessarily be a great politician. Because some really fucked up people that I served with who are in it for themselves. There were absolutely people who came into the SEAL community with the idea of what it could do on a resume bullet. And I'm not going to say that's wrong because people can choose to pursue whatever career path they want to. But just because you have a particular acronym behind your name on a business card or resume, do your due diligence. That's what I'm saying. I do think that experience, especially in an environment where you are looking at committing human capital to a combat environment, I do think that would help. Having an understanding of what it actually means and the toll that it takes and the difference between the price and the cost, I think that's important. So I think it's a good sign, but I do hope that people at the voting box or booth Maybe in the voting booth, you put your vote in the box. I'm not sure how that goes. I usually do absentee or just drop in, which I don't know. I get emails all the time, people telling me it's part of an Illuminati scheme to take over the government. I just go ahead and drag those to the spam folder, but I do get them occasionally.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Do your due diligence, what I'm trying to say.
Well, it also goes to a point that a Austrian economist named Friedrich Hayek made, separate from the economic ideals that he espoused. He was a British citizen, and he was talking about why Britain evolved and had a lot of problems the way it did internally after World War II. And you think about what World War II was for the British, for example, and maybe to the Russians this was the same thing. To win an existential conflict like that where their back was to the wall, in order to win, you have to commit all of your best, brightest, and toughest, or you're not going to win. And a lot of those people are going to get killed, and oftentimes in a situation like that, what maybe gets left over can sometimes be the mentally weak, the physically infirm in some cases. You know, it's like the saying, hard times create strong men create easy times create
soft men.
Yep. Kind of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any solutions. I have suggestions, and I'm not sure they're correct. So, military service was in your family. It was talked about as something I would describe as inspirational or aspirational. And so it was the Marine Corps first, huh?
It was the Marine Corps first, and then...
What were you looking for in the Marine Corps? What did you want to do in the Corps?
Oh, God. I was kind of looking... I actually was looking for that Roman legionary experience. You know, that sounds really odd.
Of all the military branches... I don't know much about Space Force, but I'm gonna make a statement here that of all the military branches, the Marine Corps is probably the closest one. Let's be honest, it's the Department of the Navy. You and I can agree upon this. It is the men's department, though.
You've heard that?
Yeah. I'll be the first to admit it. The Marines are badass. They're some of the most badass soldiers I've ever been around. And my favorite thing about the Marine Corps, every man is a rifleman. I love that it is a profession of arms, and it starts with that, and it ends with that. And Marine Corps aviators have it in their mind that they are there to support the ground. I just love the mentality and the headspace. It's as close to the legions as you're going to get in the modern day military in the U.S.
Well, interesting you bring that up because there's other ways a Marine Corps Expeditionary Unit sort of mimics the thought process of how the legions were set up. So the legions didn't just have their core infantry. They had... We wouldn't necessarily call them special operations troops, but troops with special skills. So they might have troops brought in, they call them auxiliaries. They're foreigners that are serving to get Roman citizenship. Maybe they had special skills like archery, slinger, guerrilla warfare, scouts like the Batavian horsemen they had from modern-day Netherlands that integrated into the army. And they weren't part of separate commands or bureaucracies. They were all organic to the Legion itself, and each Legion could fight as a self-contained unit. Look at a Marine Expeditionary Unit, they do have kind of their own special operations force, recon and force recon, but they're not part of a separate command. They're organic to the Expeditionary Unit itself, self-contained, similar thought process behind the Legions.
I used to travel around a lot more doing public speaking, talking about leadership through the lens of my military experience, and I usually open with, just for clarity, nothing that I'm about to talk to you about is my creation. And a generation ago, I don't say this, but in my head I'm thinking, and why I say that is, a generation ago, the lessons that were taught to the people who taught me, they didn't create them either. It goes all the way back to human beings starting to fight human beings. Commander's intent, whether it was the Emperor's way or the, what was the term that you used? It was not the Congress, it's the... What's the group? I should know this from watching the documentary. The Senate. The will of the Senate or the will of the Emperor. All of those things have just kind of continued on. I think they get repackaged, and it's with the military background, people for some reason view leadership in the military differently, and it's really not. It's applied differently, maybe because of the environment that you're operating in, but the principles, I suspect, are nearly identical all the way back to the times that we're talking about.
Oh, they are.
Back through history.
It goes to the point that General Mattis made when he was being interviewed by the Hoover Institution and why he spends so much time studying history. And he says, well, look, you study, the Macedonians, the Spartans, and the Romans. Mattis said something. He says, when you're looking for the answers, he said, the answers are there. Now, it may not tell you exactly precisely what you want to do, but it'll light the path and show you what route you need to go down.
The broad strokes are there.
Exactly. He said there's nothing new under the sun. This enemy we're facing in, even if it was Afghanistan or Syria or Iraq, the Romans, whether you were talking about Gaius Corbulo, Marcus Crassus, or Alexander the Great in Afghanistan, Roman Emperor Trajan, who smashed the Parthian Empire in Mesopotamia, they would not have been, as Matt has said, the least bit perplexed by these enemies. They knew how to fight them and deal with them. And the basic template of what they did, you can take that and apply it to things like electronic warfare, psychological warfare, through the cyber, just doing it through cyberspace, and it'll still work.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not so sure we're creating many new things, except for Teslas.
Well,
that shit's new. And cell phones.
Some new stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But the basic, what I learned is, regardless of the technology, warfare is a quintessentially human endeavor.
Yeah.
It really is. I do not think that's ever going to change, really. I mean,
I hope that it doesn't. I think keeping that human aspect of it is what might keep it on the rails. I think if you remove the human aspect of it, it might get exponentially out of control.
Oh, it could if that happened, absolutely.
Yeah. So what'd you do, 4 years in the Marine Corps?
So 4 years in the Marine Corps. I got out.
Why'd you decide to get out?
I kind of regret that decision. I don't know what the hell was wrong with me.
Did you have another opportunity waiting for you? You're just like, you know what? I've done my time, and I'm going to look at something else.
I kind of thought, well, I'd get out for a while, then maybe I'll come back in later, try civilian life. Why not?
What year was this?
This was late 2007.
Okay.
So I get out, and my first regular job was working at an Archer Dodge dealership, selling cars. I didn't sell a single car or truck. Brother, I'm not going to lie to you. I couldn't lie that well.
Yeah.
Guys would ask me questions about, what's going to happen if, say my daughter gets in a wreck in this Dodge Cab. I'm like, well, she's probably going to die if she's lucky.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough sale.
I mean, I couldn't lie to people that way, so I quit that job, and I went to work as a doorman at a couple of topless strip clubs in the Westheimer district of Houston. It was the Penthouse Club and All Stars Men's Club. Now, the funny thing was...
How did you find this job? Hold on a sec. We need to talk about this transition from car salesman to doorman at a strip club.
So here's exactly what happened. So I quit the job, and the owner of the dealership, Mr. Archer, he liked me because I was always, 30 minutes early to work every damn day. A lot of other employees were not that reliable. He wanted to talk me into staying doing something else. Really, really good man. I just said, no, sir, I want to move on. So I kind of had to clear my head. I went back to my apartment, and I said, okay, I need to just take a drive, get a cup of coffee. So I drove down to the Borders Books and Music store in Meyerland in Houston, in the it's near where the 610 Loop intersects Beach Nut Shopping Center area, popular place. So I go into Borders, and I get a copy of the Houston Press, which is like the underground newspaper. I don't know why the heck I got it. Something in there piqued my interest, but I'm paging through the want ads. And it said Penthouse Club and All Stars Men's Club are hiring doormen. And I said, I could get some writing material for books out of this stuff. So a couple of days later, I made arrangements to go in there and have an interview. And I still had my dress shoes, the Bates that I used to have with my dress blues. And I, kind of got those shined
Like Bates
up.
Lights boots?
Not boots, the shoes.
Oh, okay.
The shoes. So I went there, got the job. And I didn't figure this out right away, but the guy who actually owned the two clubs was a former mafia boss who was living under federal witness protection.
Awesome. Awesome. So he's hiding in plain sight.
Oh, he was. The feds set him up with it. Now, he got outed in 2009 after I had switched over and gone into the Army.
Yeah.
And saw the news story about it. I don't know, what happened to him after that. It definitely gave me a lot of writing material.
I was going to say, what was your describe an average day at work for me, if you would.
Oh,
so you're like checking IDs, basically, is what we're talking about?
That was part of it.
All right.
So when I would work at All Stars, the night shift starts at about 6 o'clock, 1800. So I get there at 5:30, and you're in a coat and tie, got to dress nice, present a good appearance, that sort of thing. And you'd have
you wouldn't want people, to have a bad impression of the strip club they're about to go in.
Of course not.
Yeah.
You gotta show them how high class it is.
Of course.
Yeah.
You need to dress up before you come in here.
Got to look uptown. So people would come in, and checking IDs was part of it. And they had taught us had things to do to look for phony IDs. There's certain things you can do if they're not that well designed. making sure no one under a certain age came in, that sort of stuff. We had a dress code in place mostly to keep out gang members. And the owner, his real name was Vincent Palermo. His name we knew him as was James Cabela. But he was, he sounded like a mob boss from The Sopranos.
Yeah.
He'd be like, "Hey, how you doing there, kid? You's doing a good job. I just want you to know I appreciate it." Other than that, you're a pretty good guy to work for. But typical day, I get there, and I'm just checking IDs, and I wasn't a bouncer or anything like that. Now, clubs usually do have bouncers just for that, particular contingency. They usually didn't want the doorman to be too big and intimidating. They want someone kind of average size like me. Introduce people, make them feel comfortable, turn on the good old boy attitude, whatever, and then, but then you had other problems you would have to deal with. Now, people think you would get in more altercations with customers getting drunk, right? That wasn't the most common thing. The most common altercation you had to deal with was when two strippers got in a fight in the dressing room over who stole whose hairbrush.
Really?
Oh, sir, I BS you not.
Were they just going at it?
Oh, good Lord. I mean, it was like trying to pull apart two xenomorph aliens trying to rip each other apart. I mean, sometimes these girls would, pull out straight razors and start flashing them around.
Shut up.
Oh, that happened a couple times. In fact, the other part-time door guy, my buddy Mark Tudon, he almost got slashed in the throat when a chick pulled out a straight razor and then, tried to go Benny Hot on his neck.
So, yeah, you do that for a bit and you realize maybe the Army is a better call.
Well, I first tried going back into the Marine Corps. So I went to the recruit, and I hadn't even been out a full year yet. And I said, look, I just want to keep my rank of corporal. And I said, I want to go into military intelligence. I always wanted to do intelligence and spies. That was one of my life's goals I wanted to do. So I walked in, and they were pretty blunt that they just didn't really, give a darn. They weren't going to lift a finger to help me. If you're trying to go back into the Marine Corps, I learned the hard way. They make it pretty hard. It's not easy. They really do.
Huh.
So I say, well, shoot, this isn't going to work. So go outside the recruiting office, and there's an Army E6 who recruits for MI. His specialty was recruiting prior service guys from the other branches to come into Army military intelligence. So he talks with me, says, hey, man, you can be ready to go in a few weeks. We'll send you straight to Fort Huachuca. You start with a new set of uniforms, pick right up where you left off. You'll be what they call a MOS-T, an MOS transfer. You're in a separate class grouping from the initial entry soldiers that are going through and haven't served before. And we'll put you through the interrogation HUMINT course in Fort Huachuca. So I said, sure, outstanding. Send me back to the MEP station, do whatever I got to do. Went through that, which, is never a fun experience.
It's not a smooth running machine is the best way I can describe it.
No, sir, it really isn't. So I go into the Army, go to Huachuca, and a few weeks after I graduate, I'm in Fort Wainwright, and then I go over to meet the unit that's already deployed in Iraq. I do the last 6 months of the deployment there. I learned how to do interrogations, did a number of interrogations for real, interrogated some HVIs. One interrogation lasted well over 7 hours.
Well, so the Fort Huachuca school, how long was that?
That was about a little over 6 months.
And is that where you learned interrogation techniques?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And, HUMINT type of not interrogation, but HUMINT type of intelligence skills was all that course?
Yes, sir. It was all together. The first half was straight interrogation, and then learn how to do debriefing and we call it follow-up questioning. If you have a insurgent, you finally get him to quote unquote break and cooperate with you, and he says, okay, this guy, whatever the bad guy is, Abdul bad guy is in this compound, and here's where it is. Well, you got to follow that up with, okay, what kind of security measures are there? So, are there mines? Are there booby traps? Are there armed guys? So when the door kickers go in, they don't walk into a trap and get killed. Stuff like that.
Yeah. How close was the schoolhouse informational phase on interrogations versus the rubber meets the road, sitting down in front of somebody?
I will have to say it was considerably different. I mean, it did give you a good foundation, but there's only so much they can do in training. When I actually went to Iraq, you actually sit down with the guy you're interrogating. There were things that happened that they couldn't really prepare you that well for. You'd be surprised. You may have a really, really, you think is a really, really hardened guy. You got, information targeting packets that thick. He's killed all these people. You bring the guy in, you think, man, I'm going to have to go hard at this guy, do what they call, fear up harsh. and the dude breaks down and starts crying for his mother, stuff like that. Then you may have a guy, you think, okay, he's the weak link.
Yeah.
If I can push him hard enough, he'll break, and I'll get the rest of the network. And then that guy just doesn't break.
It's hard as woodpecker lips.
Yes, sir. And it can be a rewarding field, but can also be very frustrating, because when you've got a guy, you know he's got information on IED cells, guys making EFPs, for example.
Yeah.
And every hour I waste trying to, break this guy and get him to talk, every hour that I'm failing to accomplish that, is that going to cause some cavalry troop, some infantryman, or some SEAL to lose his life when we could have prevented it? And I go to bed every night, and I had to learn how to kind of cope with this. Go to bed and I said, okay, what if I didn't do my job that good? Is some poor guy going to get his brains blown out, get his legs blown off, be crippled, leave wife and kids without a husband and a father because maybe I didn't do the job good enough? Not a night went by that I didn't think about that. And eventually I had to try to just kind of compartmentalize my thoughts, or it was going to drive me crazy.
Yeah. What was the most effective approach that you found sitting down interrogating people?
Honestly, it's all over the ballpark. I learned you cannot ever be sure until you sit down and do it. You just cannot be sure until you sit down with a guy. Humans, no matter where we come from, what culture we come from, race, ethnicity, geographic area, all humans are still ultimately individuals. Every individual person is still different. And when I would sit down with some of these guys, I would think for sure, based on what I knew about the guy, okay, this is what he likes. Okay, maybe this is a vulnerability here. And I'd press hard at what I thought, based on logic, was the vulnerability. And the guy would just sit there and stare at you or lie to your face. You knew he was playing with you. He was lying to you. And that could get really, really frustrating, because on top of everything else, higher-ups are watching. I was the new interrogator. And I was fortunate. I had an outstanding group of NCOs and warrant officers that took me under their wing and still had faith in me, even when I didn't always get the job done the best way possible, because I was struggling, I was learning.
Yeah.
But you have the higher-ups looking at that. And
Well, what year was this?
This was 2009.
Okay, so we had already come through the phase of enhanced interrogation and the road that led up. I mean, I think it's fair to say that early on in both conflicts, Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States, or at least some people inside of the United States, really flirted with the moral boundaries of who I think we are as the fabric of this country.
Oh, they did, definitely. There was, and going back to when we started doing that, kind of goes back to the beginning of the Iraq War. We get there, we execute the mission, we knock out Saddam. And then it's just, some of the things we did were so stupid that it just beggars belief. This is where I think a lot of our senior policymakers and flag officers don't study military history like they should. Anybody who knew the military history of Iraq and the Mesopotamian region, forget the, post-Islamic era, go back to the Roman Empire when they were fighting the Parthians. Anybody who knew the history knew there's a certain mentality and way they fight. When you smash them hard, that's when they start to get their stuff together and fight. And when they do, only the most brutal, ruthless tactics the Romans used would usually work for any amount of time. But we go in there, and then what happens? Okay, we've knocked out Saddam, and then some people get it in their heads, hey, let's turn Iraq into a Western democracy, whatever, turn them into...
Never going to work.
Yeah, never going to work. And so what do? We disbanded the Iraqi Republican Guard, probably the one institution that, out of sheer fear, not saying they were good guys because they were not, but they could have held the country together. So you had all these military-aged males whose one skill was, making explosives and shooting AKs. You just taken away their jobs and their paychecks. We shut down all government enterprises, put lots of young military-aged males out of work. Anybody who studies any history knows that's a recipe for disaster in any country and any culture. And so who was hiring? The Al-Anbar insurgency.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
there were plenty of state-sponsored agencies that were willing to fight a proxy war.
Absolutely.
Via either personnel or material support.
Oh, absolutely. And then they had Al-Qaeda in Iraq come in. Of course, the Iranians, because they're not stupid, are looking at that threat across the border saying, okay, they know they couldn't take us on one-on-one. And the Iranians had no illusions about that. But you do it by proxy. Guerrilla war with proper training, proper support, teach them how to make EFPs.
Yeah.
They can bleed them to death and do a lot of damage. And then we had this insurgency pop up all over the place. And if any of those guys had studied the history of that region, they would have and should have known they were making the wrong decision. And those decisions, plus what happened at Abu Ghraib, they had
in many places.
in
I
many
mean,
places, yeah.
there were offset locations in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and quite frankly, it's open source. People can Google the rendition program that the United States was using in sending people to other countries that did not have, well, not that we were necessarily following the Geneva Convention with our interrogation techniques, but if it wanted to get really spicy, you could just take them to a country that didn't give a fuck and say, oh, it wasn't us.
Well, that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, I forget. I was reading an article where a Gulfstream went up for sale, and it was one of the birds that the agency had used for rendition.
Oh, really?
And somehow the sale didn't go through because I guess the buyer in the research was like, "Oh fuck!" Like, I don't. But that purchase, and I may be totally getting this backwards, but I swear I read this in an aviation magazine. It was the research that the buyer did that actually lifted the lid a little bit on the rendition program that the agency was using. But yeah, how did those enhanced interrogation incidents, how were those addressed when you were going through the schoolhouse? Because I have to imagine they were addressed head on.
They were addressed head on right off the bat.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
So first time you go in there, and we had good instructors. They were all senior NCOs that all had some cases 2 or 3 pumps under their belt. They really knew their stuff. And that was the first thing they addressed. They set everyone down. They said, gentlemen, if you are here because you simply want to be sadistic and torture another human being, not happening. They're like, we don't do that. It is not allowed. It is prohibited by policy, law, and practice.
Yep.
We're going to show you what you can do and what you can't. And so there were significantly more constraints. And then going back to what happened at Abu Ghraib, when we started having indicators that there was an insurgency, and it was obvious to anyone who knew the history that was what we were getting into. History was repeating itself. And some of our senior flag officers insisted, no, there's no insurgency. It's just a few dead enders. I remember hearing that a lot. And they ordered a lot of these interrogations things that happened at Abu Ghraib. And the crazy thing was, there were parts of Iraq where people probably were happy we got rid of Saddam Hussein. We could have maybe had at least some of those people on our side, but you take his dad and you go humiliate the guy by making him sit in a naked pyramid, well, he's not going to be your best friend when he gets out. And those orders came from the highest level, again, by people who were 10 echelons above reality, 6,000 miles away, no skin in the game, or do they care?
Well, fortunately, they were held accountable. Or not.
Well, some people may have tried to, but ultimately they...
It's also one of the great failures is that the accountability stops at like multiple rungs underneath where it should for a lot of these things.
Oh, it absolutely does. It goes to a point that an Army colonel named Paul Yingling made an article he wrote in 2007. It was controversial. I read it. And I think he summed it up best. He said, right now, any soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, I think is what he said. I'm paraphrasing here, not quoting exactly. I can't remember exactly what he said, but what he basically said was, those guys face far stiffer and dire consequences for losing a rifle or a Kevlar than a general does for losing a war.
It's accurate.
And it's unfortunate. Think about the withdrawal in Afghanistan. Absolute clusterfuck, inexcusable how that was handled.
Yeah.
And the only person who has faced any accountability for his actions is Colonel Stuart Scheller, who had the balls to come up and basically speak the truth. He's the only one who's been punished in relation to it, and he's the guy who spoke out. And I'm going, it's so jacked up. The only way I can describe it is to say this is about as jacked up as a San Francisco drag queen at a Mississippi Klan rally. I don't know any other way to phrase it.
I've never heard that phrase, and I'm mentally working my way through that thought process, and I think it's accurate. Yeah, it's terrible. The withdrawal from, people have asked me about quite a bit, the withdrawal from Afghanistan because of my experience there. And, I would say 2010, as as somebody in the military who was only working at the tactical level, you had the feeling like, hey, I'm not so sure the extended presence here is the right thing. But we can, let's roll it another 10 years. Not my decision by any stretch of the imagination. How they executed the withdrawal was so completely and utterly fucked up. And the fact that the people in charge continued with that, even though it was like a catastrophic failure that was just compounding on itself, and nobody thought to change course, like, hey, whoa, this isn't working. They should all be fired. And that's not enough. They should all be held accountable in some way, shape, or form. That hurts a lot more than being fired.
Oh, absolutely. Going back to when I watched the withdrawal happen, so my last 2 years in Afghanistan as a contractor for the intelligence community, without going into too much detail, I worked on a strategic intelligence collection platform. Some of the best people the intelligence community had to offer in there, and I loved all those people, amazing people. And we had told the higher-ups, no uncertain terms, look, dude, when we start to pull out, the Afghan army, the ANA, is most likely going to collapse like a tin shack under a Gulf Coast hurricane. You need to have.
I could have told him that as a fucking E3.
I mean,
anybody who ever worked with that partner force and was responsible for training and equipping them and preparing them for the job. If you took them to Vegas, and you're like, listen, man, all your money, black or red. Black is they're going to do fine on their own. Red is shortly after we leave, the country's going to funnel onto itself. I don't know anybody who would have put money on black.
Yeah, I wouldn't have. We made that clear. Now, we were kind of involved in the periphery as far as what withdrawal plans were. Now, as far as I know, what we had always thought was the final fallback point was going to, for when the shit hits the fan, should have been Bagram.
Oh, of course.
We always thought, we just assumed that's what they would do because, Bagram, for your viewers, it's a huge air base.
Got a ton of standoff.
It's in the middle of nowhere. It's got mass flat lands and rolling hills, lots of standoff distance. Anybody who tries to get close to it, you can smoke them with the drone, no problem. But Kabul and North Kai, and we've been there. First of all, driving there, you go through a lot of what we might call potential choke points. I mean, any buck private, lance corporal, specialist in the Army or Marine Corps with 2 weeks of infantry school could think of 30 ways to set up ambushes there. And then it's right in the middle of that city, no standoff distance, and it's surrounded by elevated positions. That's what we call a fire sack ambush waiting to happen.
It's the scariest environment imaginable.
Absolutely. When I heard on the news how we were doing the withdrawal, that we had given up Bagram. One thing they got right, they didn't tell the Afghans what we were doing. The reason is because you couldn't trust most of them. A&A might have family in the Taliban, that kind of thing. But when I saw that they had given up Bagram's gone, and they're going to be withdrawing through Kabul, a friend of mine told me about that. I honestly thought he had been reading a Duffel blog article. I thought, no way, man, no freaking way. That's a disaster waiting to happen.
It doesn't make tactical sense.
It didn't. I mean, it's getting 13 guys killed, and those guys did not have to die.
No.
Period. And
the withdrawal did not have to go down the way that it did.
No, it didn't. And it really gets kind of bizarre. So, President Biden actually carried through his administration with the Trump administration's stated intent to draw down and leave. Now, when the commander-in-chief is saying, hey, boys, we are leaving, if you're a contingency planner out there, you dang well better start planning for a good evacuation.
Yeah.
And it looks like some of those guys didn't do that. And looking at the disaster, Colonel Stuart Scheller spoke out about it. Everything he said was true, and yet he's the one who's facing consequences. And the other guys who were involved in this whole war from start to finish, from the beginning to the withdrawal, I'm just going, I mean, if you or I, when we were in the military, if we had made a really stupid tackler that got a bunch of our buddies killed, we'd be facing court-martial at the bare minimum.
Yeah. Shit canned, just exercised from the community, a rocket ship out of there. Yeah.
And he goes to, lack of accountability. Well, look back at how the Romans dealt with it. When Roman generals made some stupid mistakes, one of two things happened. One, they got killed, which Marcus Crassus, the guy who put down the Spartacus revolt, he fucked up royally when he tried to take on the Parthians by himself and didn't do his homework on the logistical problems the way Caesar would have. They killed him, they poured molten gold down his throat while he was alive, then chopped his head off and made a little ornament out of it.
Okay, that's a little excessive. A touch excessive, but I like the creativity.
Sure. You got to give those guys some credit. They wanted to send a message.
For
and then
sure.
Other generals, if they failed miserably and they came back to Rome in shame, they could be exiled, or in some cases, the Roman senators would come out there and basically give them like an ancient blanket party. So, because for their case, war back then, ancient warfare, the mismatch between the geography and the advantages we have and the enemies were considerably more narrow. It was a zero-sum game. They could not afford the stupidity and incompetence, and they knew it.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess you call that maybe extreme accountability, for lack of a better word.
I don't think we can afford the incompetence either. I think the difference is how quickly the consequences catch up to us, whether that be our reputation in the world in general, the degradation of our military readiness. I think it just takes a little bit more time.
Well, absolutely. We're in so many ways, our nation's been blessed by God with the best geography in the world. Ocean moats on either side, friendly nations to the north and the south that we can integrate with. We're 1,000 times stronger than both of them put together. And I think a lot of people maybe have in the back of their mind that we can go out and do wars like Iraq and Afghanistan, and there won't be any consequences. And where that concerns me is regarding what I see happening in Eastern Europe and the Ukraine. And a lot of people don't been thinking about a war between the U.S. and Russia. I don't necessarily think that's the most deadly short and midterm concern. Let me explain what I mean. So I'm going to use some analysis presented by a brilliant geopolitical analyst named Peter Zeihan. He used to work in the State Department. Absolutely brilliant man. He predicted the war in the Ukraine years ago, and nobody seemed to listen to him, at least not in, the DOD or the government. They should have. Now, me and a lot of my fellow analysts in U.S. Army Europe, we were taking this stuff seriously because we could see the indicators were there. Well, where the consequences might be is not what we think. So, using Peter Zeihan's analysis and how he lays things out, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Ukraine is one of the world's biggest bread baskets, wheat, grain exporter, fertilizer products, that sort of thing. And the next ones are Russia and Belarus. Now, when the Russians come into Ukraine, everybody gives a lot of press to the fact that their army got a bloody nose from the Ukrainians using the Javelin missiles.
Which, by the way, is the most awesome military weapon ever invented.
Oh, absolutely. It's an amazing weapon. It's incredibly lethal. But they're losing sight of something that's kind of coming in under the radar. And I wish somebody would tell our newsmedia and shake them awake about this, but the Russians have been successful in some areas. Go into southern Ukraine, look at how they've completely annihilated, occupied all of Ukraine's ports and export terminals. I say, why are the Russians doing that? Well, it's going to shut off their ability to, export fertilizer, petroleum byproducts, urea, nitrate, wheat, and grain. What regions of the world are incredibly dependent on those food exports? Middle East and Africa. So, if nothing changes at this point, if current trends continue, in 2 or 3 years maybe, we're going to have mass famine on an almost unparalleled scale in, of all places, Africa and parts of the Middle East. And remember, when we hit sanctions on Russia and Belarus, we're kind of stopping them from exporting those products as well. Mm-hmm. It's going to probably compound the problem. Now, why would the Russians want to do that? You think, well, if they cause famine in places like that, it'll cause them to collapse into civil war, and what will that do? It'll take tens of millions of Islamic and African and Arab refugees, and it's going to drive them across the Mediterranean like it did on a smaller version in 2015, right into the heart of Europe, Italy, Spain, France, and Germany in particular. Now, aside from the obvious financial strain that creates for these NATO countries, okay, looking at it from a conventional military perspective. Okay, if you and I are enemies, I've got a lot of advantages over you, and I've invaded you a bunch of times over the last few centuries. One way to make sure you don't have to face me is you kind of do something almost dirty and underhand and almost asymmetric in nature. You cause mass chaos behind my lines so I can't do anything to you. Well, when it'll probably be, and Peter Zeihan thinks it'll probably be the biggest inward migration since the collapse of the Roman Empire, and boy, is that big. Aside from all the obvious problems that creates, possibly civil war. I mean, how many ISIS fighters and terrorist insurgents might get in there? Aside from all the problems that creates, which could overrun Europe and potentially to Western Europe and pretty much destroy them, keeping in mind France is a nuclear power, some additional concerns there. That's one possibility. Suits Russia's security interests, and let me assure you, the intelligence services running the war in those port cities know exactly what they're doing. So that's one scenario. The other possibility is it's going to cause the right-wing parties in Europe to come to power. This is where we kind of get into the analysis I and other guys have looked at. And so the right-wing parties come to power. And they're a lot of cases they're basically the Nazis. I mean, that's putting it lightly. They're nothing like our quote-unquote right-wingers, to be honest.
Yeah.
And they may clamp down and persecute them and ethnically cleanse them because that's what Europe's really, really good at.
Oh, the migration would cause the right wing. Okay.
Yes. It will cause them to come to power. Remember when the refugee flows came in from the Middle East a number of years ago, AfD got a lot more seats. The National Front in France became, I think, one of the most powerful parties all of a sudden. But here's what a lot of people forget. A lot of the members of those parties are Russian sympathizers and have expressed pro-Putin sympathies openly. So, if you're the Russians, either scenario suits you. If the right-wing parties come to power, they're anti-EU. A lot of them have anti-NATO tendencies, to kind of put it lightly. And they're sympathetic to the Russians. Aside from the counterintelligence problem that creates, which is pretty obvious, they've now potentially got control of the political system and the militaries of Germany, part of Italy, and France. Now, what kind of problems does that create for the U.S. and NATO if that scenario comes to pass? I don't know if anybody's really thinking about that and what kind of problems that could drag us into.
What kind of timeline would you associate with that?
Oh, God.
Ballpark, of course.
Ballpark. If nothing changes, 5-6 years max.
You think Putin's really thinking that strategically?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's just him. Here's what a lot of people don't understand about Russia's military history and how their intelligence services work. So ever since about the time of maybe it's the time of Catherine the Great, I think, their security services have always run that country. Slight exception with Joseph Stalin because he was so brutal, cunning, and evil, even he could keep him under his thumb. But with that exception, the security services have always run that country for centuries, where the communist revolution comes and goes. So regardless of what Putin may think, and he may be going a little bit bonkers if information is to believe, and that's possible. But if guys like Nikolai Patrushev or Alexander Bortnikov, who's the FSB director, this is how these guys think. And for the Russians, you got to remember their history. They've done stuff like this before. So going back to their history, look at their geography. It's huge, right?
Yeah.
Hard to defend. And the only way you triumph and evolve as a people in that geography is through good old-fashioned brute force. You just beat your way through everything. Of course, the Russians are known for that sort of mindset and the way they run their military operations. So as they kind of expand outward to kind of get security, to protect themselves from invasion because they've been invaded from the south, from going back to the time of the Huns in ancient times, they came through Russia. Think about how many times Russia's been invaded from Europe. Remember World War II, the German Wehrmacht goes in, the Russians, between them and the Ukrainians, lost 27 million people. And they lost more people at the Battle of Leningrad, civilian deaths, than we lost military deaths in World War II. Just kind of put that in context. And they have a zero-sum outlook. Our former ambassador, for example, in Russia in World War II was a guy named George Kennan. And he articulated a containment strategy post-World War II against the Russians and the Soviets in something he called the long telegram. But a point that he makes is in the Russian mindset, the way they look at warfare and geopolitics, Russians in their mindset only have two types of neighbors, vassals and enemies. You're either their enemy or you're their bitch. There's no in between. So how do the Russians get some security with that mentality? They use paramilitary troops like the Cossacks going back centuries. They slip them into countries on their border, stir up a lot of trouble, sometimes use them to kill their own diplomats. And the Russians may say, oh, comrade, you killed one of our diplomats. That was not a nice move. Maybe we're going to send in the Red Army now. That's what they did in Prague and Hungary. Or they say, hey.
That was a great Russian accent, by the way.
Hey, I worked on that. It took a little practice to get that right.
Yep.
But in other cases, they may say, hey, wherever Kazakhstan used to be, they stir some problems up and say, hey, would you like us to move the Red Army in there, buddy? We just want to help you out.
Calm things down.
Exactly. Calm things down, tamp it down when they're the ones stirring up the trouble. Move the Red Army in, and that's when that Russian army boot heel slaps down their throats, and they just kill everybody in the government and put their own proxies in charge. And they don't even try to hide what they're doing. So they use Russian paramilitary methods, causing Russian-backed problems to have a Russian solution injected into the problem that suits their security needs. And in some respects, what it seems that they're doing is just doing that on a grander scale.
In Ukraine.
In Ukraine,
Yeah.
then what's going to potentially happen in Europe if nothing changes. Now, there's other long-term consequences regarding the Russians. This is also something else that Peter Zeihan has been talking about, and a lot of people just, maybe not enough people are paying attention to it. So let's go with a little overview of Russian military history, and I'll try to sum it up and condense. So, they have World War II, and they really broke the back of the German Wehrmacht in modern-day Ukraine. Now, in the process, the Russians treated the Ukrainians like second-class citizens. They used to round up Ukrainian civilians in World War II and make them run through minefields to clear the way. And that's kind of stuff they used to do.
Controversial approach.
Oh, very. Now for the Russians, hey, comrade, this is just standard procedure. That's kind of how they view it. And so they break the back of the German Wehrmacht, really. It's a combination of Stalingrad and the Battle of Kursk. And the Russians do it through strategic use of counterintelligence. So, example, the Russians had 5 spies placed in British intelligence right before World War II. McLean, Burgess, Blunt, Philby, and some other guy. And they're getting a lot of intelligence on German weapon systems from those British assets they had that they had compromised a long time ago. And the German Wehrmacht was convinced the Russians were getting accurate intel. They thought it was coming from their guys. The Russians ran a disinformation campaign to convince German Army and SS counterintelligence that some of their own people were the spies when they weren't. They killed them thinking they got rid of the spies.
Oh, shit.
And then, of course, the Russians still have their spies. And then with Stalingrad, for example, the Russians were very good at counterintelligence disinformation, the NKVD and then something called SMERSH. That was a Russian military counterintel organization run by a Russian general named Viktor Abakumov. Really nasty SOB. His guys are the ones that put Solzhenitsyn in jail after World War II in the Gulag in Siberia. But they report directly to Stalin, and here's kind of things that they would do. So before the Battle of Stalingrad, they basically deceived the Germans. And if you were to look on paper where the Germans and the Axis powers were, where the weak point in their alliance were, you had one part of the line that was Wehrmacht and SS troops. They kind of got overextended. They were making a go for Stalingrad, and the Russians were deliberately luring them in, sacrificing the city to bleed them to death. They lure them in, and then they have a relatively, not I would say small number, but a smaller number of Wehrmacht and SS troops than they do Italians and Hungarians. Now, if you look at where the weakness in their lines were, knowing what you do about the Wehrmacht and some of Germany's allies, like the Italians in World War II, where do you really think the weak point was? The Hungarians and Italians, many of whom were slaves brought in, of course, conscripts. And what the Russians do, and this gets to a misconception people have about the Russian Red Army, that they just overwhelm with mass number. It's not really what they do. When they want to find a break in the enemy's lines, they use a mass attack not to throw their troops' lives away, but to push until they see where the weak point is. The second they identify that weak point, they take everything they got and they barrel right through. Well, that's what they did at Stalingrad, and that allowed them to encircle the German Sixth Army under the command of Friedrich von Paulus and then basically starve out a section of the German Wehrmacht. Now, where they kind of outsmarted the Germans, doing something really cunning, this is pure Russian cunning what they did. So early on in the war, the biggest source of human intelligence that the German Wehrmacht and the Nazi SS were getting were Russian soldiers surrendering. Because, hey, communism under Stalin really sucked. It sucked sweat off a donkey's ball sack, let's be honest. Who would want to live under that? So a lot of them were surrendering. And so the Russians said, okay, how do we fix this? So here's what they did. NKVD, counterintelligence, and SMERSH took all their counterintelligence agents, dressed them up as sergeants, lieutenants, and privates.
Had them surrender.
Exactly. They had them surrender, pretend to surrender. Oh, comrade, I give up. And when the Germans would approach, they'd ambush them and kill them. They did this from St. Petersburg all the way down to Kharkov in the Ukraine. Now, of course, the German Wehrmacht sees what's happening, so how do they respond to it? They tell the soldiers, from now on, when Russians surrender, just kill them. And as far as the Russians are concerned, it kills two birds with one stone. Eliminates their source of human intelligence and gets rid of guys they think are traitors.
Yeah.
And the German Wehrmacht essentially did their work for them.
Creative solution to an interesting problem.
Very. And so that's kind of how they think. Now, we get to the Cold War, and we have our containment strategy, which was really pretty brilliant. And again, Peter Zeihan sums it up better than I do, but his analysis is just very concise and just beautifully done. We contained the Soviets by bringing them with alliances, CETO and NATO, and we used the U.S. Navy to secure all the world shipping lanes so that the old European powers don't have to go out and build empires and get in wars anymore, so on and so forth. That was where we got into bed with Saudi Arabia to use the oil to help our allies. As Peter Zeihan said, the oil powers the alliance helps hold back the Soviets. More like what the Byzantine Empire did in their strategy when the Western Roman Empire collapsed. So we do that, and then we get to the 1970s. The Russians are getting a lot more aggressive in their subversion operations in the U.S. And so the Russians, and let me digress here for a second, the Russian intelligence services don't spend the majority of their time and effort on intelligence collection like a lot of people think. They spend more of it on long-term subversion. So here's where one operation they did in the U.S. worked brilliantly. The anti-nuclear energy movement. That was one place where they started up and kind of helped throw fuel on the fire. It stopped us from becoming energy independent, because if we and the Western Europeans used nuclear power for our electricity, that would hurt their economy, because the Russians, the only thing they could make money off of was oil and gas exports, and it worked. Well, then the U.S. deep state, quote-unquote deep state, hits back.
We're not allowed to use that term.
Oh,
that's some very deep QAnon shit.
Oh, okay.
I think. I don't know.
I put it in quotations.
I hear it in the modern vernacular, and I always want to ask people, what the fuck do you mean?
I tell people, I'm like, guys, what do you really mean? Where is this thing? I don't see it.
Yeah.
But so various U.S. factions, sometimes partially within the intelligence community, long story short, they really want to get President Reagan elected. He's the guy they want. And so Reagan is more or less brought in, wins the election in a landslide, and then we hit back. And what do? Besides the military buildup, which Reagan is credited for with SDI, Star Wars Defense, and all that, we work with the Saudis and we crash oil prices. That starts to cripple Russia's economy and really starts to make them go under a lot faster. We collapse them. They collapse under their own weight. 1992, the Soviet Union's gone. Okay, hoorah, kumbaya, everything's going to be great, right? Here's what started to happen. When the Soviet Union collapses, their healthcare system, what they did have, not that it was that great, but it was there, goes away.
Vaporized.
Just pretty much overnight. And the Russians had a 60% drop in birth rate like that in the space of a couple years, such that it got the attention of the RAND Corporation. They put the pieces together really well. And again, Peter Zeihan's analysis sums it up good. I'll paraphrase here just because he hits the nail on the head. So with that drop in birth rate, other things start to happen. The Russian mafia explodes all over the globe. And you have millions, we don't know how many millions of beautiful young Russian girls either flee the country or are kidnapped and sex trafficked all over Europe, Asia, and parts of the U.S. Now, you do that to these young girls who can be having babies, combine that with the drop in birth rate, run this forward, what does that do to a country? Plus, they've got an HIV epidemic, opioid epidemic far worse than ours is, and it's really bad.
Currently?
Yes, sir.
Really?
It's bad. The reason a lot of the word doesn't get out is the Russian intel services control everything.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean some of the information hasn't gotten out. You can't hide everything, but boy, do they try. So that birth rate issue, people leaving the country, starts to take effect. And you get to a point where the Russians, just like a lot of the Europeans, are going through a demographic inversion where they're, for the first time in human history, they're going to have far more people 60 and older than they do 20s to their 40s. Now, that creates a problem for the military because you need enough of a certain age demographic to maintain a military.
To serve in the military.
Absolutely. To have that reserve manpower. So if the Russians start to go under because of a population collapse, which unless something changes, they may, they can't field an army big enough to protect themselves, they start to collapse. Now, on the surface, some people hearing this may say, well, that's good, screw those bastards, let them starve, ha. Here's the problem. What happens to the thousands of nuclear weapons they got that are no longer secure? As bad as Russia's security services may be, at least right now they can secure their own nukes. What type of problem does that create as far as nuclear weapons trafficking? So if you're in the quote-unquote deep state, I'll just use that term that everybody hears it, but if you're in the intelligence community like I am, you work in Europe or at the strategic level, okay, whether you work for DIA, CIA, that's a serious problem. And so you're thinking, oh my God, how do we deal with this? How do we contain a collapsing Russia with all those nukes? And so that was one dynamic that played out with some of the tension I think the Trump administration had with members of the intelligence community. When we talk about pulling out of NATO, this long-term problem is what they were looking at. And I don't necessarily think that Trump understood that dynamic and what that threat was. Mattis certainly did. He alluded to that in some of his hearings, talking about, birth rate problems, Russian girls using abortions as a form of cheap birth control, which eventually can damage a woman's ability to carry a baby to term.
Yeah, of course.
He talked about all that.
Mattis did?
He did.
Yeah, it's a deeper understanding of the problem they're facing.
Absolutely. And so that was a dynamic that I think Trump stepped into that minefield without understanding what was at play. And so that's a deeper underlying issue that those of us who have spent a lot of years in the intel community know is coming down the pipe. And it is a legitimate national security issue that those of us in the intel community and the national security state know we have to grapple with, come hell or high water. It's not secret. This is all open source information. You can figure this out just by doing enough research. It's not hidden. And that potentially gets into another problem. And this is I'm kind of getting theoretical here. This is kind of my own speculation. But with uncontrolled nuclear weapons detonations, there is some evidence that ties into the UFO topic.
We definitely have just taken a right-hand turn. I like it. Let's go.
So this is going to be a lot. This is going to be educated guessing and speculation on my part, but it's informed. So, a few years ago, the existence of that Pentagon UFO program, ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, headed by a really sharp Army counter-intel agent named Luis Elizondo, gets written about by the New York Times. Blockbuster story. Everyone's like, well, what the heck? And only 3 senators in the entire city of Washington knew about it. Senator Inouye, Senator Reid, and Senator Stevens, they authorized it. It's a black program, as we would call it. And so they realized, okay, UFOs are real. The government's admitted as much. These things have incredible maneuvering characteristics, things that we just can't seem to figure out, just mind-blowing capabilities. But we see that the majority of these sightings, as far as the military is concerned, are around military nuclear assets. You think, well, why is that? Carriers, submarines, intercontinental ballistic missile facilities, and a lot of people from the military and the intelligence community, Air Force intelligence, have come forward and said, hey, this stuff is real. Let me tell you about what happened. Now, the only reason I segue into this, and this is, again, I'm speculating here, but if UFOs are connected in some way to our nuclear assets, who knows what they are? Uncontrolled nuclear detonations might give some people a little bit of a concern, bringing those things, right?
I think uncontrolled nuclear detonations should give everybody some
for
level of
other
concern.
reasons too, absolutely. And then for us in the intelligence community, the challenge of that issue, it's something a lot more fundamental. People think, okay, we don't have the truth about UFOs because these guys working for the cigarette smoking man on X-Files and the Syndicate are trying to keep it secret so they can turn us all into aliens or something like that.
Great show, by the way. Loved it growing up.
I love watching it too.
Oh,
it was great. And there's a lot of good episodes there, a lot of good stuff. But from an intelligence perspective, you look at what one of the core functions of intelligence is. You're not just collecting information to inform policy. One of the things you do in order to inform policy is to identify enemies and threats. Now, how do you identify your enemy and defeat your enemy? The first step, as Colonel Philip Corso said, is knowing their intent. So, example I use, you've got country A right here. They got a small country It's really, really weak. And then a big country over here that has comparable military capabilities. The little country over here has a bunch of crazy people that say they want to come across your border and start blowing up your citizens. Country over here that has comparable capabilities has no intention of harming you. They want to be your friend and trade, whatever. Who's the bigger threat? The difference is intent.
Yeah.
So no one, if government's saying UFOs are real and you're in the intelligence community, the first thing you want to establish is, why are they here? What is their intent? And how do you establish that?
Well, God damn it, Matt. What is their intent?
I have no earthly idea. But
it would be, let's assume that they're a more advanced species than us from an intellectual capacity, which I'm not sure would be difficult, given what I see of human behavior towards other human beings. We are fucked up in so many ways, and I include myself in that. If you were a higher species and you were looking at our planet, I mean, wouldn't nuclear weapons or nuclear power or facilities be one of the most dangerous things that you could identify? Right? They'd probably have the ability, if they could travel through space and time. And,
you would think so.
Yeah, that they could identify something that would maybe be hazardous and something that wouldn't be. I would say nukes are probably at the top of that. And they probably go, why do these fuckers have so many of these things? Why do these ants have so many of these nuclear weapons? So it wouldn't surprise me that they would maybe spend more time around the things that have the most risk to them.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Now, if
I have no idea what their intent is, though.
Sure. I have no earthly idea. Now, it's possible somebody may have figured that out, but I've never met anyone who's figured that out. So if you look at that, you think, okay, there's a lot of things it could be. What if it's an adversarial technology, hypothetically China or Russia? Okay, that's a major concern. You don't know. And so it kind of puts you in a difficult position. If Congress calls, say I'm a director of an intel agency, they call me forward and say, hey, Mr. Reed, what is this? What's their intent? You've been dealing with this for 20, 30 years. What is it? And I say, I'm sorry, Senator, I have no earthly idea. I don't freaking know. That's really the wrong answer, even though it's the honest one.
I was going to say, it's the truth.
It's the honest to God truth. And nobody in the intelligence business really wants to have to say that. But if you don't know what they are, but it looks like these could be some superior adversarial capability, whether it could be whatever, aliens, interdimensional travelers, Chinese, Russians, whatever, you look at what you've seen them do, and like Luis Elizondo says, I don't know if it's a threat, but it damn sure could be. And he said something to that effect. And so if you don't know, but it looks like the technology is superior, and you're in the intelligence community, whether it's the CIA, DIA, DOD, NSA, whatever, you're derelict in your duties if you don't start preparing for them becoming a threat because of the damage it looks like they could do if they decided to become a threat. Now, could that dynamic have played out back in the 40s and 50s? Possibly. I have no knowledge of that. Again, I'm engaging in kind of low-octane speculation here, but to an extent, based on the revelations we've had that have been acknowledged by our government, it does make some sense, I think.
Yeah. You think the government will ever just fully open the dossier on what they know about UFOs?
I don't think it's impossible. Now,
why don't you think they do it? Do you think that they're afraid of people being scared and the reaction that they would have?
That gets to a very good point. So here's a perspective I want to give to you and your listeners here, because there's kind of a one-dimensional way a lot of people, that maybe liked X-Files may kind of look at this. You can't hide the truth, don't hide the truth, we deserve to know the truth, so on and so forth. But let's say hypothetically, there were UFO crashes at Roswell and a few other places the conspiracy theorists say they were there. Let's just say for argument's sake that happened. Okay. If you are a history major, when you want to understand why something happened, you have to look at it in the context in which it occurred. Not to make an excuse for it or justify, but just to understand it. So think of where we were in the late 1940s. We just come through World War II. We were going to be facing down the Red Army. And what a lot of people who don't study a lot of declassified history and books that have been written about espionage post-World War II, is that the leaders of U.S. military intelligence, Nathan Twining, General Arthur Trudeau. General Nathan Twining was the head of Air Material Command, where Wright-Patterson was at, where they had the Air Force's Foreign Technology Division, where they chopped up enemy planes, figured out how they worked, that kind of thing.
Reverse engineered stuff.
Absolutely. He was, just German stuff, really, German and Japanese hardware. And he was kind of one of the, World War II era military titans like Curtis LeMay. He was a brilliant man. And let's just say this happens. Well, in that time frame where a lot of people don't understand this, and there's been books written about this, they write books about the FBI or J. Edgar Hoover, why he did what he did. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, and the heads of military intelligence had figured out that the Russian intelligence services had penetrated our government at all levels, right up to a couple levels beneath, I think, Harry Truman when he became president. They had people in the State Department, what became the CIA, all those, the suspicion of all the spies the Russians may have had in the CIA is one of the reasons the CIA Counterintel chief James Jesus Angleton almost lost his mind tearing the CIA apart. Probably screwed over some innocent people, maybe thinking these Russian assets were there. So all this is going on in the background. And Curtis LeMay, Nathan Twining, Arthur Trudeau, they know this. And so does J. Edgar Hoover. Okay, what do we do about this? They're trying to figure it out. Now, let's say hypothetically, you're General Nathan Twining. Something comes down the desert at Roswell, one or two things. And you go down there and you go, oh, shit. This is a damn alien spacecraft. Holy shit. Well, one, you don't want the Russians to get a hold of it. And when that news announcement went out from Roswell from Major Jesse Marcel saying they had a crashed saucer, whatever.
It's a weather balloon.
Oh, sure. That's what they said. But when that went out, the Russians monitored the news wire, and we knew they had agents all over parts of the U.S. I mean, it's how they penetrated the Manhattan Project. That was, I think, the Russian GRU that did that. So they couldn't just hide it from the Russians. You have to basically hide it from the rest of your own government. What kind of steps would you have to take to do that? And now you say, okay, keeping it covered up makes a lot of sense then. But there may be another reason a lot of people don't think about. It's because of what you talked about, people going crazy, maybe freaking out. So think about the cultural context of the 40s, 50s, and maybe early to mid-60s. Think about the TV shows and the movies, black and white movies. All the war movies they made. No cussing, no swearing, no blood, no violence, because they didn't think the audience could handle it or would tolerate it. Or TV shows like I Love Lucy. They always showed Ricky and Lucy in their bedroom. They're in separate beds. They didn't want to show that a husband and wife would actually be sleeping together, because they didn't think the audience could handle it or would tolerate it.
That the husband and wife audience
Absolutely.
Watching the husband and wife couldn't tolerate it? Yeah.
That kind of was the mindset back then. It was in many ways a very strict social conservatism in a way. Well, think about that for a second. If your view of the American people is if they cannot handle something as simple, factual, and natural as a husband and wife sleeping in the same bed together, if we came out and told them, hey, we've retrieved these alien spacecraft, and oh, by the way, they might be hostile. Oh, by the way, they can come in and out of our airspace, and right now there's not a damn thing we could do about it. How crazy might they go over that?
Yeah, they'd lose their fucking minds.
Yeah. And I think the members of the World War II generation who were setting up our intelligence community post-World War II, regardless of what you think of their decision, I think they, if assuming that's what they did, hypothetically, they had a lot of good reasons for why they did it. And when people maybe stand up and shake their fists and say, oh, you guys are evil, you're engaging in a conspiracy, people have a right to know, so on and so forth, they're not looking at it from the perspective of the people in the military and the intelligence community who are the ones who have to mop up the potential second and third order effects of a course of action like that.
It's an interesting take on it for sure. Do you think that the U.S. was able to infiltrate the Russian intelligence services and government like they were able to infiltrate ours?
What little I know about that, I can't discuss.
I'm going to hypothesize that we do exactly the same shit that other people do.
Oh, I'd imagine so.
Yeah, so I mean, like the Manhattan Project or the levels of government right under the president, you have to assume that the U.S. is trying to do those things as well. I'm just curious as to the level of success. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just hypothesizing or thinking in real time of I wonder how successful we were.
Well, you can probably get some illumination on that if you read the Red Sparrow trilogy by Jason Matthews. You might have seen the movie with Jennifer Lawrence. And
I'm aware
Joel
that there
Richard.
is a movie. I didn't watch it.
So Red Sparrow was originally a book written by a former CIA case officer named Jason Matthews. I believe he spent the bulk of his career in Eastern Europe and Moscow, which Moscow was like the toughest place to operate.
Oh, I bet.
And yet our CIA did sometimes get the better of the Russians. Now, I don't know any of the specifics, and whatever I do know I can't talk about. But when Jason Matthews wrote that fictional book, he does give you some insight into what kind of tradecraft they use to go up against the KGB and the GRU. But the Red Sparrow was basically about this program the Russians had called the Sparrow School.
Yeah, sexual exploitation.
Exactly.
Essentially.
And, a lot of the girls sent there didn't necessarily have a choice. If a girl gets caught, or prostituting herself, the Russians say, "Oh, Svetlana, if you don't want to go to jail, Comrade Yuri going to send you to special school for very special Russian lady." That's usually kind of how the conversation might have gone.
Yep.
And that's how they do it. And it was a fairly effective program. They did use it. But in the end, it didn't save them from, collapsing and losing the Cold War, but it definitely had its uses, and that's what that was about. His trilogy is really, really well done.
Yeah.
And he's somebody who's been there, done that. And that gives you his books give you some insight into how that was done.
Kind of like my buddy Jack Carr, who writes fiction with air quotes. It's highly accurate in some instances and with some specifics that most readers may not even realize. So there's a large element of truth in the fictional stories. I think I hear what you're saying about the Red Sparrow.
Oh, there is. I've read a lot of Jack Carr's books. Love his books. I actually met him at a book signing in Houston just about maybe 2 months ago, I think.
Yeah.
Really, really nice guy. Really easy guy to talk to.
He's all right. My back still hurts from carrying him through buds, but that's a different story for a different podcast. Holy shit. So we went down the UFO rabbit hole, tied it back into Russia, though. I like that. Torture. Does it work? As an interrogator.
So I've never actually used it, obviously.
That's a good thing.
Are there situations where it has worked, done a certain way? Absolutely, and the Russians were the masters at it. But just doing torture by itself with nothing else, of course they'll say anything to make the pain stop. Russians have kind of a different way of doing it. We tend to think of them as just these unsophisticated, vile Slavs that are just monsters. And yet part of the reason we had that impression is after World War II, the only people we talked to about how the Russians operated were the German Wehrmacht generals, who the Russians had just beat the shit out of. And of course they told us, oh, the Russians aren't smart. It was just overwhelming us with sheer number, and they're just vile heathens, yada, yada, yada. And that was our only context. Of course, years later, German soldiers who fought the Russians at the lieutenant colonel level and below write books, and we realize they were actually pretty smart in a lot of cases. And so we think of them as just, oh, it's going to torture some guy, yank his fingernails out, bamboozle us on the fingernails, whatever. But no.
And that will get somebody to talk.
Well, sometimes it does.
Well, I'm not saying what comes out of their mouth is going to be truthful.
That's the thing. You don't know if it's truthful or not. It's not the best long-term route to go down. However, it can be beneficial if you do it in conjunction with other methods. And the Russians are very good about that. They use that in combination with other techniques to brainwash. When the Korean War was over, there were a lot of American POWs. They were shot down. We didn't get back. We know they used them, experimented on them, Nazi-style tested brainwashing techniques. Now, I don't know if they ever worked or not, but the Russians were masters at a lot of that stuff, and that's not because they're unsophisticated or stupid. They're quite cunning in what they do.
I think one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to underestimate your enemy or to think that they're stupid. I mean, the enemy that we fought largely in Afghanistan and Iraq were centuries behind when it came to the technological advantage. But if you wanted to have them, hand you your lunch, just underestimate the capability they had at very simple tactics often, and you're in for a really bad day.
Absolutely. And when I was going to Afghanistan in 2011, I was the non-commissioned officer in charge of the S2X Human Intelligence Operations Shop for my Stryker Brigade. And I had a lot of good young soldiers working under me, very inexperienced, very green, privates and specialists, first deployment. And one of the things I told him, I said, do not let yourself think that because we come from a more advanced culture technologically, that means these people are stupid.
Yeah.
If you get in your head, these guys are inferior or stupid, you're already beaten.
Yeah.
You will regret it.
Yeah, it's a matter of time until they hand you your lunch. How long did you work in Army intelligence?
Let's see, in the Army it was 3.5 years active duty total.
And then you got out and you essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, contracted for intelligence agencies as well, right?
Yes, sir. So I got out in 2012.
Why'd you get out the second time?
Oh, God, that's another interesting story.
Was the strip club hiring again? What was going on?
No, sir, it wasn't that. I did not want to go back to that job. I had my fill of that. And let me tell you, that job, it gave me a lot of stuff to write about and a lot of the future books that I've written, but not all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, I wouldn't
really
expect
is.
that it would be.
It's like, people who work at McDonald's don't always go back to eat there.
I would be shocked if they eat there at all. Yeah. So, okay, second time. Why'd you decide to get out?
So I made the decision towards the tail end of that second deployment, the one in Afghanistan. And I had seriously considered staying in. And I talked to the retention NCO, a master sergeant I deployed with previously, good guy. And I knew he wouldn't try to bullshit me. And I said, look, man, I'll consider re-enlisting. I'm not going to ask for a re-enlistment sign-up bonus, anything like that. I was like, get me to some unit that deploys a lot with short deployments like Fort Sam Houston, where maybe you can deploy like to South America, places like that. And I said, or maybe you can get me a job at Area 51. Now, he did exactly what he's kind of looked at me and went, I was only halfway serious, but he came back and said, I don't know what we can do for you. Maybe we can find something. I was like, oh, well, screw it. That was kind of a rough deployment. It sucked the life out of me. We lost a lot of guys, lost some friends.
This was in 11?
Yes, sir, 2011.
Probably mostly to IEDs?
Yes, sir. We lost a lot of good guys. Some, one friend of mine in particular had both his legs blown off, and then he offed himself a couple years later. So,
what base, where were you located on that
So when
deployment?
we first got there, we were at Fob Logman in Kalat
Okay.
in Zabul province, which we had a lot.
That's where I was in 2010, out in Nabahar.
I came in right behind you, and then we went down to Fob Masangar in Panjwai district and took over operations from the Canadians and kind of built all of our operations from scratch there.
Yeah.
So,
by that time I was terrified of going on any type of road. We were driving in the most inhospitable terrain possible just to avoid the IED threat. And for about half that deployment, I was stationed in at Mogensen, which, as you know, is right along Route 1. And
familiar with it.
Holy fuck, the damage that would come back from those vehicles, the people that were forced to drive up and down and just route clear Route 1. I wouldn't wish that job on anybody. That mental geometry of getting into those vehicles every single day, knowing the threat, the IED threat. I mean, I think at that point they were finding like 1,500 pounds of buried HME. Like, there's no V-hold vehicle that's going to be able to, not be inverted by that charge. It was gnarly.
Yeah, it was. We had a lot of those same problems. In fact, it reminds me when I kind of had an epiphany moment near the tail end of the deployment. It was late October. I had taken one of my soldiers, a really good specialist named Ben Lott. I walked him to the helipad. He was going on R&R. And I always made sure my soldiers got to where they were going on R&R. And so saw him off, and then I saw our engineer units, disarming and, hitting and blowing up a lot of IEDs that had been placed in the road. The IEDs had been there for a long time. I kind of looked at it, and for me, it was kind of like that scene on the second Godfather movie where Michael Corleone is in Havana. Talk about getting a casino going when the whole Castro.
For clarity, I have not watched the Godfather series.
Oh, well, there's a scene in there where he's been assured by the Cuban government this guy Castro and his rebels are not a problem. And Michael Corleone is a former Marine infantry officer. He can analyze things tactically. They tell him there's nothing to worry about. And he sees how the Cuban rebels under Castro are able to penetrate the security checkpoints, and they're so fanatical they'll blow themselves up with a grenade just to kill a member of the security forces. He sees that and analyzes what it took for that suicide bomber to hit the grenade to infiltrate, and it's like he just gets it all of a sudden. So I'm seeing all this stuff happen, and I think, Jesus Christ, they planted all that stuff right under our noses. We've got PTIDS blimps, Predator drones, ground patrols, human intelligence operations.
And yet every night.
All the time, this is happening. And I just kind of stared for a minute. And it was kind of weird. It was like that epiphany moment where I'm just kind of thinking to myself, I'm like, this isn't going to end well. And I felt that, but I kept it to myself out of a sense of professionalism to the officers I was under and to my soldiers. You can't always show that kind of, viewpoint. You've got to keep the guys focused on mission no matter what. But in the back of my mind, that's what I was thinking.
And did that lead to your decision to get out?
It sort of did. It kind of played a role. So I'm on my way out, and at the time, my ETS was before the unit was actually getting back from deployment. And so by Army regs, I had to be boots on the ground stateside 90 days out for my ETS.
So you could do all your paperwork and
Yes,
process. Yep.
And so I basically went back by myself. They handed me my orders, sending me back to Fort Wainwright in November 2011. My boss, Sergeant First Class Phil Hasty, says, "Here you go, Sergeant Reed. Have yourself a nice life. Good luck to you." And I took off, went back to Ali al-Salim, thinking I was going to feel happy. In a way, I kind of felt happy and relieved, but when I'm sitting there in the cargo of the C-130, the cargo straps, vegging out to go to sleep on the way to Ali al-Salim, I kind of got hit by this sense of loneliness that just kind of came out of nowhere. My fellow NCOs are gone, my warrant officers are gone, my soldiers are gone. I'm thinking to myself, Matt, you really are on your own right now. So I get back, but I think about all the things that happened on the deployment. I kind of come to the conclusion we were probably going to lose this war. It was going to end up something like Vietnam, withdrawal from Saigon, which it did, and all the waste. And thinking about that disgusted me in a lot of ways. I'm sure it did everybody who served over there, all that sacrifice and waste, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But I thought, okay, I'm still passionate about intelligence work, whether it's human intelligence, tradecraft, or analysis. It's one of the things I was born to do. So I said, okay, I'm going to get out of the Army, and I'm going to go back and work as a contractor and develop an intelligence community career that way. And that's what I did. And as soon as I got home, I went back over working for Mission Essential Personnel as one of their senior analysts at RC South. And then later I went to that, higher up platform. I was working out of Camp Phoenix and Bagram, did that. And then in 2015, I left that platform and I went to where I spent the last 6 years working as a counterintelligence analyst in the Balkans region of Europe.
Which explains your knowledge of what's going on in the Ukrainian area. How was that working in the Balkans?
Oh my God, that's a whole nother story. So,
what specifically did they have you doing?
So the job of a counterintelligence analyst, in a nutshell, is to make sure that we properly vet our human intelligence sources, whoever they are, make sure that foreign intel services don't penetrate them or double them back against, as we call that a double agent operation. Yep. And make sure that if they have any assets that are compromised, you work with the actual badge and credentialed counterintelligence agents who have legal investigative authority, if need be, to root those guys out. That's basically what you do. It basically comes down to making sure that the intelligence you get that you may give to commanders, to policymakers, or to any group of infantry or spec ops door kickers, that's part of the process to make sure the intel is accurate, because there were times in Afghanistan where we might have been getting what we thought was good intel, and initially it was, but the guy had been compromised, and some guys go into the house and it gets blown up.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're trying to prevent. That was my part of the job. I did that for just a little less than 6 years.
How hard is it to be truly certain that the information that you're getting is truthful and accurate?
So
because I've always found HUMINT to be, we would never action single source HUMINT because super fucking dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. I would never recommend that.
Well, actually, I take that back. Yeah. We did action single source HUMINT, and oftentimes what we would find is it was a neighbor that was pissed at their, I was just about to say buddy, but they weren't buddies in this particular scenario. They were pissed at their neighbor for something that had happened generations ago, and they would use U.S. military force as a payback method.
Yeah.
It's another thing that I don't know if a lot of people realize. the grudge game is fucking real in some of those
boy,
countries.
Oh, absolutely. It's
generational.
big time.
We're talking people who were not even alive when the incident occurred, still with a very, very heavy chip on their shoulder. Single source HUMINT oftentimes would lead us to those type of things. But HUMINT, you're a human being. I'm a human being. The people listening and watching to this are human beings. It's really goddamn hard to sit down across from somebody and really know that they're telling you the absolute truth for reasons that are altruistic as opposed to having deep and intense personal motivations.
Sure, so that's always a constant challenge. And so whether you're a HUMINTer, a counterintel agent, or counterintelligence analyst, trying to be absolutely sure, it is complicated and difficult. There are methods you use, corroboration, checking up on that source. Now, obviously, because I still hold a security clearance, I can't go into any of that. But we have a lot of ways of doing it.
We would often pair it with SIGINT as well.
Absolutely.
HUMINT, SIGINT, mesh.
You mesh that together, you can get a pretty good idea. And that gets into what they call source validation or asset validation, which we were trained in Fort Wayne, right? I was, and a lot of other guys, by a really brilliant Army chief warrant officer who really knew his stuff. And so there's lots of things you can do, but the fact is you're still dealing with, the most unpredictable, volatile organism on this planet, and that is another human being.
Yeah.
Now, there's ways you can assess motivation. See, if he really wants to help you get the bad guy, because the bad guy blew up his camel or, shot one of his relatives, you can probably trust him up to the point of killing that bad guy. But can you trust him past that?
It's $1 million question.
Exactly.
Which the U.S. government has paid millions of dollars many times.
Oh boy! I saw stuff like that play out all the time. Some of the screw ups I saw.
Cash for intel.
Oh my God!
What do you think? Let's ballpark the U.S. cash for intel expenditure. Billions?
Oh God, I don't even want to.
Hundreds of millions for sure.
It's probably a lot, and I mean it. Some of the things that I saw happen, some of the things I saw, as long as it didn't result in deaths, were almost comical. Even in interrogation, we had some comical things happen. There was a failed suicide bomber one of my buddies interrogated. We called him Bernie because he, burned himself up.
Yeah,
that was actually kind of comical. The guy looked like a crispy critter, and
that's
somehow,
rough.
It's just like, wow, dude, you really can't do anything right. You couldn't even blow yourself up right,
What was the hardest interrogation you did?
That was the one that went over 7.5 hours. This was a guy who was really smart. He was one cunning bastard. And we had rolled him up by accident.
Really?
The Cav Squadron guys, I think, rolled him up. They basically just kicked in the door, and the dude's sitting there in his dish dosh. He's like, didn't offer any resistance. Went happily. And we had a more senior interrogator who had interrogated him first. And I was the junior most interrogator. And, of course, my NCO, Sergeant Kim, great guy, says, hey, Reed, it's time for you to get your feet wet and cut your teeth. This is a good way to do it. Hey, Roger, Sarge, tell me what I got to do. So I go out there with one of our interpreters, a really, really good guy named Hassan. If you met the guy, you would have liked him. He was funnier than hell. But he was one of our Category 1 interpreters. Excuse me, Cat 3, U.S. citizen. We went out there to talk to this guy. And interrogation was not a success. I tried damn near everything in the book, and I could tell this guy was smart. He was trying to use my words against me, almost like he was a lawyer.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, I actually thought.
So you guys were having some mental judo matches.
Oh, it was absolute mental judo, and people don't realize that can be mentally exhausting when you do it for 7.5 hours. And when I came out of there, I just felt mentally and physically drained. That was the toughest interrogation I ever did. It was unfortunately not successful. We didn't get anything out of the guy. He didn't break.
What do you do when the guy just sits there, or gal sits there and doesn't say shit?
Well, if he or she doesn't, you don't give up right away. You exhaust all possibilities because they may have information that someone's life is riding on. So if they just sit there and don't talk, we don't just get up and go away and say, well, too bad. I'm going to go to the chow hall and have KBR and make me some ice cream, whatever. No, you keep trying. Even though you've got other interrogations to do, you set aside enough time to go with that person as much as you can. Finding out, what's their motivation, or maybe see if you can get a reaction out of them. Stuff like that, like, oh, hey, man, this guy, ran over one of your goats or killed one of your relatives. You try to see if you get a reaction, then maybe you push that direction.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff we would do. But sometimes if you had a guy that just wouldn't talk, past a certain point, there just wasn't much we could do, to be honest.
The battle of wills at that point.
Absolutely.
You just said something that I bet most of the listeners didn't catch, and it reminded me. You said KBR. How much money do you think KBR made in the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns?
Oh, my God.
It's worth people doing a little Google. And I'll broadly describe them as they were the service providers for U.S. military and probably allied forces, I think in both theaters. Specifically in Afghanistan, I know they were. But yeah, they did the chow hall personnel, the ice cream that you mentioned, and I'm sure the government was paying wholesale, right?
Oh, God, sure. Yeah, there were no markups or anything
Yeah.
going on. I haven't actually looked at it, but...
Kellogg, Brown, and Root, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
KBR.
It's worth a Google.
Yeah, you Google that, you're going to go down all kind of financial rabbit holes.
But it
It's
also,
insane.
but it ties into the decisions that could be made as well, right? Skin in the game. I don't think it's dishonest or inaccurate to say that there were organizations and individuals that were deeply enriched by the campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq. Were they based off of those individuals' desire to become enriched? I don't know how willing I am to go down necessarily that conspiracy. Well, I don't know if it would be a conspiracy theory rabbit hole. I'm not sure how deep I'm willing to go down that rabbit hole, but it happened for sure. And a Google search will net you some of those answers. And it's fucking disturbing.
It really is. And you track the cash flows, you see all the money that was spent. I mean, our country was basically spent trillions of dollars in debt. That's never a good thing, even if you can print money out of the Federal Reserve.
I think it was $1 billion a day at peak Afghanistan and Iraq was the expenditure to keep both of those theaters of war going on. It's $1,000 million a day.
Oh, yeah. It was just, you look at the money that was spent, it was just astronomical. And what we spent and what we sacrificed versus what we got out of it,
Yeah.
not much of an ROI, if you ask me.
Yeah, I don't even know if my kids have history books anymore, if they just get you a fucking iPad with all of the modern history on it. But I am curious in 10 years or 20 years how war in Afghanistan and Iraq will be discussed or written about. I'll be fascinated. Sit back there with my own, viewing it through the lens of my own experience there. My dad and I argued about Iraq when I first went to Iraq. He was just like, again, lens of Vietnam. He's like, this is fucking bullshit. This is not correct. We're not doing these for the right reasons. I'm like, shut up, Dad. Fucking America, Team America. We got to go save, blah, blah, blah. We're doing it for the right reason. And now I look back, I'm like, God, idiot. Not my dad, me. And it's changed for sure. My thoughts on both of those engagement. I can wrap my head around Afghanistan better. Iraq is a tougher one for me.
Well, it also goes back to, do people realize we made those mistakes already? Yeah, it's in the past, but we can't afford to make these mistakes again, especially if, God forbid, we get in one hell of a shooting match with China and Russia. We cannot afford to make these kind of stupid mistakes anymore.
Yeah, we really can't.
And it's a future challenge. And one of the positive things that happened after Vietnam that we did do right, General Creighton Abrams, the Army Chief of Staff, shut everything down and said, we are going to do a full autopsy post-mortem on this goddamn war and figure out just what the fuck went wrong.
Are you aware of that happening for Iraq and Afghanistan?
No, sir. And that's
a tragic error.
That's what really concerns me. Because one, it lets a lot of our senior leaders off the hook, where they kind of want to say, okay, let's just not look at that, that mess we made over there. We'll get it right the next time. And they're If the United States Army, for example, wanted to do now what Creighton Abrams did after Vietnam, they could do it like that. But you've got to have the right 4-star Army Chief of Staff who, by force of personality, jams it down in the DOD and the Army's throat and says, we are going to figure out what the hell went wrong, no matter who it embarrasses, because we cannot afford to do this again. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening.
I don't either. And I don't know what that says about the future of our military or country at large. What was the most challenging aspect of working in the intelligence community?
Oh, God. There were a lot of them, but I'll tell you one in particular that kind of sticks with me. And when I think about it, it just grates on my nerves. So we have a lot of different echelons in the intelligence community.
Did you see that? I got that fucker.
God. Yeah, he's gone.
Yep.
Like catch fly with a chopstick, you know, karate. But we have a lot of echelons that information goes up through on both the military side and the 3-letter agency side. Some of it makes sense because you want to have more than one person do analysis to make sure you filter out biases. It makes perfect sense. And then vet the information, so on and so forth. One, we've got more layers than we need, and the reason that creates a problem is not so much a time constraint problem. It's that I used to see this happen. You would collect intelligence, okay, through any number of sources. You put it in a product, you make your analysis, and the information says what it says. What would happen? The information. This is another piece of what went wrong that I'm trying to get out there into the podcast blogospheres to help people get their heads wrapped around this. As it goes up through those echelons and layers of additional analysis and vetting, it provides the opportunity for people in those echelons to polish the information. I heard that all the time. They say, well...
They would use that term, polish?
Oh, oftentimes. More often than that. I heard that word quite a bit. We all knew what that meant.
I feel like that means change the information to suit a particular narrative.
That is often what happened. And some of it would go up, and they would sometimes try to do real slick. They would try to parse words here and there, and again, polish it as it went up the chain. Where that was because maybe somebody didn't want to tell a senior general something they thought they didn't want to hear. Of course, if you don't tell the general bad news, you're not doing that man any favors. But, I digress. So it goes up. It would get polished, quote unquote, so much that if you had a piece of intelligence that was accurate that, say, looked like a pile of shit, by the time it gets up to where it maybe gets to the generals and the national policymakers who we have a sacred duty to keep informed, by the time it got to their level, that intel that looked like a pile of shit might have looked like a dusty diamond. It had been polished so much. And I'm sure that had some bearing and some effect on how things went. And so you take that and then combine it with another issue we had. So when units come in, Marine Corps, Army, they're on either a 6-month or a year rotation. They're constantly rotating in and out. And there's tremendous pressure on those battalion commanders and those brigade commanders to show progress.
Metrics.
Exactly. And woe to any colonel or captain, lieutenant colonel or field grade or whatever that does not show progress showing we left our AO better than when we found. They're under tremendous pressure. In some ways, you could argue, and maybe even incentivized to fudge things and lie. So every rotation goes through, and they keep showing progress. And maybe the higher-ups, when they do their battlefield circulation, everybody's, kissing the general's rear. Yes, sir. Who war on terror. Yeah, who coin doctrine. We got this, yada, yada, yada. And so they're seeing, we're constantly making progress. So everything's got to be going the right way. And then you have generals testifying in front of Congress. They constantly say, hey, we've turned the corner. Now, I love that phrase, we've turned the corner. And Senator Warren once hit back at one of the generals, and she said, we've turned the corner so many times in Afghanistan, we're going in circles. And so those two dynamics, I think, played a role in how a lot of stuff got jacked up.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot of ways to fix that. But I saw that continually play out because when you're a contractor, you're there for a longer duration. You see different units rotate in and out. And I even saw some of that in the Army units that maybe rotated through the Balkans. They're under pressure to show progress.
Yeah.
And
Well, if your advancement is tied to metrics.
Yes. And I saw that all the time. They're using metrics. And they have all these fancy slides and metrics thrown up there, making everything look good. And I'm thinking, well, okay, if everything's so hunky-dory, why we got 4 guys in the med bay with their damn legs blown off? And I sometimes interjected stuff like that. And I was fortunate when I was in the Army. We had an outstanding brigade commander named Colonel Todd Wood, good man. He personally went to bat for me on a couple of occasions. I never got a chance to tell him thank you. Good man. One of the things he would do when we would have our briefings and planning meetings when we were in Afghanistan was very simple. He let his senior staff officers get up, brief information, propose a plan for what they wanted to do, and then when they were done, he would tell them to basically sit down and shut up. Then he would look over to the captains and below and the NCOs and warrants, and he'd say, "Gentlemen, sanity check." And some of the plans that were proposed, not that they were necessarily bad plans, they actually made some sense tactically, but in some cases, we didn't have the ability to support them with the proper
there's a
intel
gap
support.
between
Exactly.
theoretical and practical.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so that's one way a commander can kind of mitigate those problems. But those 2 issues of intelligence information being polished in one era and the rotations coming through and being pressured to somehow show progress come hell or high water,
Yeah.
you can see how that fucked a lot of things up.
Yes, I can. So have you decided to leave the intelligence industry?
I haven't made that decision yet. So when I left Kosovo a few months ago, it was because my position got cut. It seemed to come out of nowhere. And hey, it's how the cookie crumbles.
Yep.
There's cutbacks. Not mad at anybody. I had a good job. I was fortunate. The company I worked for, SOSI, had outstanding managers that took really good care of me. Never got a chance to tell those guys thank you. I'll have to do that someday. Left a lot of good people behind. So I come back. I say, okay, I've been living and working overseas nonstop since I went back into the military, went in the Army in 2008. I got to start building a life stateside. I got a lot of money saved up. And so I haven't decided if I'm going to go back to work yet. I might. But in the meantime, what I'm doing, I'm marketing a series of books that I've written that I got independently published through Amazon. Spending some money on advertising, some social media marketing, that sort of stuff, trying to compete with a lot of other authors that have a lot more juice behind them.
Yeah.
But I was able to draw on my military experiences, my experience in the intelligence community, and yes, even my experience as a doorman to write some books that I think are very unique and exceptionally good and almost stand alone by themselves.
The desire to write, have you had it for a long time? Did you know at some point you were going to become an author?
Yes, sir, I did. So where the desire really hit me was actually when I was reading the works of Gus Hasford, reading his actual books that Full Metal Jacket was based on, some other stuff that he wrote, and just the way that he wrote. And I thought, I can do this. And so I just sat down while I was in college, just played around with writing, and came up with some really, really good short stories. And so I continued to play that forward and then think, okay, I've got to come up with some unique plots. I found I really enjoyed writing. I just started writing and I loved it. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it really is. If that's the kind of thing you enjoy and you like being a wordsmith, playing with the written word, so to speak.
Do you like writing nonfiction or fiction?
Oh, it's fiction. So, for example, very first book I ever wrote was called In the Death of Night 2.0. And this is where I drew on my knowledge as a history major studying espionage in World War II. So let me back up a little bit. In World War II, one of the things we did that we haven't done, we used the mafia and organized crime to go after German and Italian spies on American soil.
I like it. Tell me more.
Oh, it was good. Oh, God, this is some shit. So it was a naval intelligence officer of Sicilian descent, of all things, and, of course, J. Edgar Hoover. And what had happened, we get the declaration of war after Pearl Harbor. British intelligence says, hey, there's a shitload of espionage cells that Germans and Italians have along the waterfront because that was where we were going to be sending all of our men and material to Europe.
Makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. They said, but we don't have a lot of detailed information on them. We don't know how you're going to root them out. So they meet with President Roosevelt and say, okay, what the hell are we going to do? And they knew that World War II generation wouldn't necessarily tolerate a lot of the civil liberties violations we've put up with, so they had to come up with something else. So here's what they did. They sat down with Lucky Luciano, Sam Giancana, and Meyer Lansky and said, hey, we're going to call a truce. We know you guys hate Mussolini because he's a socialist, and mob guys don't like socialism. It's bad for business. They hated being under his boot heel and that of the Nazis. They said, we're going to call a truce. You guys run whatever criminal operations you want. But we want you to kill people for us when we identify who they are, and we want you to guarantee the security of our ports, factories, and refineries and shipping ports in the Northeast and the waterfront, Norfolk, Virginia, up and down that area. Because the unions worked those areas and who controlled them back then, the mob. So say a German foreign exchange student goes up and takes a picture of a ship. He gets a meat hook in his rib cage and goes and takes a Sicilian fishing trip that he doesn't come back from.
Yeah.
And
the U.S. government can go, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, precisely, and it worked good. Nobody knew what was going on. And so it was so effective that by 1943, the German Gestapo and the Italians stopped sending their operatives into the U.S. because they were, shot up with Tommy guns 24 hours later. I remember reading about that, and that relationship with the mob is one of the reasons our invasion of Sicily was so successful, because the mob overnight gave us access, just like that, to a human intelligence network on Sicily.
That already existed, yeah.
Exactly. And so we knew, for example, when the Germans were eating at the chow halls, and that's when we bombed the chow halls. So it played an important role in World War II. So I said, okay, let me crank this forward to the so-called War on Terror. Let me crank it up a notch. So here's the plot I came up with, and people who have read it love it. So in The Death of Night 2.0, it's basically the premise is there's a retired CIA case officer named Bill Carpenter, Special Activities Division case officer, Marine infantry officer in Vietnam, Air America Phoenix program, old school guy. He's a tough son of a bitch, And he's running his own private security firm called Mercury Securities. And they have a massive series of contracts to do what we call technical surveillance countermeasures work, or bug sweeping is how it's euphemistically referred to in the civilian world.
I understand that term, did not understand the previous one.
Oh, well, that's what it is. You just looking for bugs, looking for listening devices, computer hacks, all that kind of stuff, keystroke monitors.
Yeah, makes sense.
And his contract is with the FBI, Harris County Courts, Houston Police, and every federal law enforcement agency all over the Southeast Texas, Houston area. So his people are supposed to be sweeping for those bugs, but instead they plant the bugs they're supposed to be finding and sweeping. So he knows
And then, of course, report back all clear.
Well, of course, they tell him that.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's all good.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Money, it's all good, brother. You guys are good. And so Carpenter knows everything they're doing. The reason he's done this is, in my book, there's a major Russian organized crime syndicate that has moved into Houston. And they've just had their teeth kicked in by the Houston police and the FBI, raiding their massage parlors, whorehouses, their laundering rackets, and they're kind of in deep shit. And the Russian mob boss in Houston, Konstantin Loganov, has been told by his boss in Moscow, Viktor Shevchenko, you better unfuck this mess or I'm sending you a message in a lead envelope. He's like, so Konstantin's like, oh crap, what do? Carpenter knows this. So what he does, early on in the book, he sets up a meeting with a man named Mikhail Vladimirov, who's an old KGB case officer he used to spar with in Berlin in the Cold War. They're not friends, but there's a mutual respect there. They do trust each other. And Vladimirov is the number 2 head of the Russian mob in Houston. So Carpenter sits down with him and he says, listen, here's the deal. I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. I can tell you if, when, how, why, and where the cops and the feds are going to move on you way in advance and help you smoke out any informants they have. On one condition. He says, I have all this surveillance data on known or suspected terrorists and spies from Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Iran that are percolating into this area to target our oil and gas refining infrastructure in the event of a full-on war. And what Carpenter's doing is he's got information from a program that actually existed called Able Danger. It was leaked to the press in 2005. It was run by an Army colonel named Tony Schaefer.
I love the names of some of these.
Oh,
programs.
I know. They're so freaking awesome.
The random name generate. Yeah.
It's just like, how did they come up with that?
Yeah.
But it was compartmented and reported directly to the Joint Chiefs. And when the 9/11 Commission report was published, Colonel Schaefer, God bless him, went to a Republican congressman named Kurt Weldon and said, hey, that report's bullshit. Did you know about our program? He's like, no. And so Carpenter has a friend of his named Andrew Bryson, a naval intelligence officer, who's feeding him all the surveillance data from that data mining program. And Carpenter says, I'm going to give you the information on all these known or suspected terrorists and spies from those countries, Syria, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Al-Qaeda, and you're going to have your ex-Stasi, ex-Spetsnaz, GRU enforcers and hitmen butcher them like hogs. I want it nasty and bloody. I'm through playing games here.
But you can run your criminal organization.
Exactly.
However you want to.
And then he tells him, says, there's some people I'm going to want dead who in the book are, we would call USPs, U.S. persons. He tells them, we need more finesse for that operation. So here's what we'll do. I'll pull cash out of my firm's profits from an offshore bank account, untraceable, give it to you. You wash it through your laundering rackets, and you hire, say, former South African Rhodesian mercenaries who are top-notch operators, but whose files are not going to be available to, say, the FBI because those Dutchmen in Pretoria remember us imposing sanctions on them, and when we ask for the information, they tell us to go fuck ourselves. Carpenter knows that, and that's how the scheme starts. And then after that, it's just constant nonstop action and killing. And it's not always the type of Tom Clancy, Vince Flynn, high-speed, kitted up, two to the chest, one to the head kind of killings. Yeah. They do stuff like in one scene in the book, a couple of hitmen named Gerhard Heydrich and Ivan Korolenko, who are best buddies.
Where do you come up with this shit, the names?
It doesn't take me long. I put pen to paper. It's like 30 seconds. I'm like, Gerhard Heydrich, that guy sounds like a real asshole. Yeah, he's perfect. And so one guy they go after him late at night. The target they go after is a chemistry student at Rice University who's studying chemistry, obviously, to make weapons. And when he's coming back to his car, Heydrich and Korolenko drive up in a van that says Loomis Plumbing on the side. They get out in mop gear and respirators. They force him to the ground. They freeze his head with liquid nitrogen, spraying him with a liquid nitrogen tank, shatter the head like glass, and just leave the body there.
I mean, that's the message. For sure, that would probably make front page news and maybe dissuade people from taking similar actions.
It very well could, and Carpenter doesn't care about how public it is. And as the book goes through, some things go right, and then of course some things go wrong. They screw some things up, some stuff goes wrong. But when I got that book published, it's about 509 pages. It's pretty big. I let a friend of mine who was a retired homicide detective from the Houston Police Department read it. And in those cases where they bring in the South African mercenaries to make the deaths look accidental, I had to do a lot of research. And when I would go home on leave, I would go out with binoculars, camera, and stopwatch and case out all the areas where it's taken place in Houston.
Oh, you're on a fucking federal watch list somewhere. You're probably under counter surveillance, but people are just like, oh my God, Matt's back.
Stranger things have happened.
Yeah.
And so I would do that because it forced me to think about it logically and practically. I had to go out there and everything's out. I had to go out and case everything and work it out. And my friend, who was a homicide detective, retired back in 2007, I think. He looked at it and he says, Matt, the way you had it set up, I could not have gotten a homicide investigation going on this.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, it was some pretty wicked, creative stuff. And when I first got it published, I let people I know read it. One of my buddies read it, and he called me and says, Reed, I always knew you were a fucked up human being, dude. I mean, what the fuck? It's all kind of creative, crazy stuff. And then one of the hitmen who shows up later on becomes a very important character as a former Spetsnaz operator named Sergei Guryenko. And he does some really, really, really crazy stuff to a guy, kills one guy, then puts his corpse in an oven and sets it to cook.
I mean, that's very fucked up, and it's going to have a terrible, terrible odor, but I can appreciate it.
Sure, a little creative. And they do some other interesting stuff. They do misdirection. So in some of the assassinations they actually do things that misdirect and make law enforcement think it's like neo-Nazis doing it. They throw out little mini swastikas there, so they think it's some white supremacist group as misdirection, when it's Carpenter essentially using the Russian mob as a proxy and what we would call a cutout.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that novel goes through. And so I looked at that novel and said, man, I got something good. Let me branch out from there. And then I wrote a short story collection called The Jackals of Babylon. And just, by the way, these two books, Amazon would not let me do wide advertising because the covers are really risque.
What's on the cover?
Well, on the cover in The Death of Night, there's a picture of downtown Houston, a KGB emblem with a little blood on it up top, and a sexy stripper, kind of doing like this on a stripper pole. And that's in relation to two female characters that are Russians, Alexandra Petrova and Tatiana Sokolova, who Tatiana plays a very important role in the book later on.
Hold on, though. That cover was too risque?
They thought it was. They didn't want some kid to see it, I guess.
Can't you buy dildos on Amazon?
I think you can.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to check that later just to see if my market sampling is correct. But if you could buy one, you probably should be able to buy the other.
Well, that was my thought process. I argued and I didn't win. And then my short story collection I wrote is called The Jackals of Babylon 2020, has a picture of a really sexy woman in lingerie on a bed. That's in relation to one of the short stories in that book called Angel of the City, about a call girl who's working as an assassin and is contracted through a cutout by the Israeli Mossad to butcher a Saudi Arabian prince. And so,
which I could also see happening. What do you enjoy more, intelligence work or writing? Because it seems like you get fired up about your writing.
Oh, my God.
But also, your intelligence work seems like it informed your writing.
It really, really did. So
I think you might have a lifetime worth, though, already.
Oh, I do.
You may not need to go back to doing intelligence.
Just about do. So I draw on all that, and I put some of that in the Jackals of Babylon. And of course, my job as a doorman, I saw a lot of crazy stuff, things that I learned about that I didn't know about. How the biker gangs run, their prostitution operations, how they secure them. Some of it gets pretty interesting. And then the more recent book I wrote is this one right here. That's an interesting one, so I'm confident in saying there's no other book like it anywhere, any library, bookstore, or Amazon.
The Time Killers is the book he's referencing.
Correct. So what that's about, premise is, it's starting off the year 2027. It's 2 years after a major war between the U.S. and China. And we bring China to her knees pretty quick, which we could do because this also goes to one of Peter Zeihan's brilliant analysis. The most important industrial input is energy. Right? China gets the vast majority of that from imported oil and gas from the Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, and other continents. But most of their navy can't sail much beyond 1,000 miles right now because most of them are not nuclear powered. At least that was the understanding as of a couple of years ago. And so when the war happens, it starts with China attacking Taiwan. They think the U.S. is going more isolationist and won't do anything. They miscalculate. They wind up in a war with South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and the U.S. And what we do, just talks about briefly in the book, we sink all their oil and gas tankers coming out of the Persian Gulf, and we basically cut their carotid artery and strangle them. They go down kicking and screaming. They release a zombie virus called the V20 virus. Gets into the U.S., kills a few million people. We got to use nukes to contain it. Gets into Russia. Russia nukes their asses. Tens of millions of people dead. So after all this happens, the U.S., Japan, Canada, and Australia do a big counterintelligence investigation to see how the aftermath happened, because the Chinese had a lot of assets in the U.S., for example, we didn't know about in the book. And what they find is the people who were directly responsible for that devastating aftermath are 4 people, 2 Chinese and 2 American turncoats, one of whom is a social media billionaire, other one's a virologist named Dr. Malcolm Lucci, who was compromised before he went to work for Army biological warfare research in the 90s by a Chinese spy named Li Wen. And what they find is the only time they were all together in one spot was in Houston, Texas in early 1990. And so that happens, and a group of soldiers and scientists working on some very highly classified black programs at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. They've got a recovered alien spacecraft, a recovered alien. They call him EBE-7, extraterrestrial biological entity number 7, meaning there might have been 6 others. And he's being interrogated by an Army 7 named Mike Raines, who's one of the main characters. They've got a project where they figured out how to go back in time by accident. And they set up basically an illegal program without informing Congress where they can go back in time. They're going to try to change the future, stop this from happening, stop the aftermath, maybe even the war from happening. And they just decided to do it on their own. So what do? They send 3 what I call operational support specialists back to late 1987. 2 men and 1 woman, based on people I knew. And what they do, they set up what we call an asset support network. They recruit police officers, doctors, mechanics, whatever, to be assets. Okay, that's how we run operations overseas, so maybe even supporting Tier 1 operations. We have assets the intel community recruits to help support them.
Yep.
That's basically what they're doing. And they recruit a guy who owns a crematorium to help him get rid of the body.
Not a bad call.
Yeah, a good way to get rid of it. Why
Yep.
not? And so gives you a little bit of window into that little bit of tradecraft. There's also another level to it. So I have a lot of fond memories of growing up in the late 80s and early 90s. Just what a great time to be alive. Love shows like Stranger Things. Thought, maybe I can do them one better. So when the book first starts out, those operational support specialists are at an actual music concert at Charlie's Paradise Bar in South Padre Island, spring break 1988. The group Expose was singing there. You pull it up on YouTube even. And they're just there for fun, relaxing, taking a break from all the work they've been doing, setting up what we call, cover for action, front operations, that kind of thing. They're recruiting their assets. And it's taken the reader back through that time frame of late 80s, early 90s music, fashion, and culture, showing just how different things were back then before identity politics ruined so much shit. And it's like, you watch shows like In Living Color or Club MTV. It's like we were going culturally, socioculturally the right direction before all this craziness started happening in the last decade or so. And I wanted to take the reader back through that in a different context, seen through the eyes of Gen Xers like us who came of age in the War on Terror and are going back in time to the era of their childhood. In the book, they all have to be from the Houston area, growing up in that era. And you get the fashion, the music, and so on and so forth. They're executing their operation effectively, but they kind of get a little bit distracted. Sergeant Raines, this is where it gets really interesting. So he gets distracted when they're surveilling a call girl named Tiffany Kowalski because she's the main squeeze of a guy they're trying to kill. They want to use her to get to him. And they're chasing her in Willowbrook Shopping Mall. This is in early 1990. They go back in time in 1990 and they meet up with the operational support specialists who have laid the groundwork to get these assassination operations off the ground and running, make it happen. So they're tailing her. He breaks off surveillance, goes into Aladdin's castle, the old arcade. He's like, oh man, my childhood. And he starts playing the Aliens arcade game. He's kind of losing his mind. And time goes on. They pull off there's a major battle sequence where they ambush Dr. Malcolm Lucci. They have to kill his bodyguards who are two veterans. They had no choice but to kill them to make the operation happen. And when that's over, they kind of take a break. And so he goes back. He goes to Blockbuster Video.
Oh, yeah.
And he's looking at, Mega Man, Contra, Super Mario Bros. Like, oh, man, my childhood. And when they were, in one part of the book, they were doing surveillance in the Houston Galleria on Lee Wynn. She goes to an aerobic studio. And all these fine chicks are in there. And Sergeant Raines and his chief warrant officer, all of a sudden, they lose their minds. Their minds go right into the gutter. And they're watching them dance. And one particular girl doing aerobics is kind of giving him a little bit of a show, knows he's watching. He runs into her at the mall, gets her phone number. He ends up hooking up with her, kind of loses his mind for a little bit.
I was going to say, he's just deviating from his mission at this point.
Exactly. He's kind of he's not thinking with this head, more or less. But the chick that he hooks up with is a girl named Christina Blackwood. She ends up playing an important role in the book. There's in the Time Killers, there's a twist ending you don't see coming that kind of punches you in the throat, the balls, and the heart all at the same time.
Is that even possible?
I tried to make it happen.
You would need to have 3 fists.
I don't know, maybe it's not possible.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I designed it to do. But at the end of the book, it's inexplicable why she behaves the way she does in the epilogue. And the epilogue takes place September 9th, 2001. So something happens between 1990 and 2001 that leads to her behaving that way, which can maybe pave the way for a sequel I plan to write. But it's got so many layers to it. It's got, intelligence community tradecraft, some hit operations, and also for all your buddies who might, be interested in this, anybody on the SEAL teams, there are some very, very intense erotic graphic sex scenes there. Oh man, between
what the fuck does that have to do with the SEAL teams?
Well, I just figured they'd like it. If you know anybody who likes to read that stuff, anybody, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, they'd all love that stuff.
You know who else loves that stuff too? Apparently, are middle-aged women reading vampire books, which is actually just softcore porn hidden in like capes and fangs and shit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's some vampire dick in the pages of those novels. And I mean, I'm not against it. I'm just like, wow. Why are we just not being honest about what this is? Like, enjoy your story.
Sure.
Like, have your personal reflection time in the bathtub, whatever you need to do. Like, I don't give a shit. But let's just be honest.
Here's what's kind of funny. So when I got this thing first published, I ordered and had copies mailed back to my parents' house in Tomball when I was over in the Balkans. My mother read the book.
Oh, dear God.
Which means she read those sex scenes.
Yep.
And she
Could be an awkward conversation after that.
And God bless her, she's married to a Marine. She's not a prude. She understands things, and she read it. And she loved the book, by the way. She says that ending was amazing. She kept me on the edge of my seat. She was like, I remembered all the sights, sounds, and music. And man, she used to be an aerobics instructor, so it brought back a lot of memories for her, But she did read the sex scenes. I kind of wanted to facepalm when I found out she did.
It's bound to happen.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my God. So
where can people find these books? Like, I love how passionate you are about the writing. I want to be able to point people in the direction so they can find these things.
They're all on Amazon.
Okay. Do you have a page that you could send people to? Where can people find your catalog of novels, novellas?
A couple ways to do it. So I have an author page on Amazon.
Okay.
If you pull up any of my book titles and type in The Time Killers by Matthew Reed and The Death of Night 2.0 or The Jackals of Babylon 2020 by Matthew Reed, you'll pull up the book page. You'll see an author photo, down on the left. You click on that, it goes to the author page and has those, and then it has a little novella series I wrote about the Westheimer corridor in Houston. It's called the Westheimer's Children series.
Okay. So that's a portal where they can find all of your work.
They can see them all there. Of course, go to any of the Amazon pages, order them, no problem. They're all available on Kindle, in addition to hard copy. And so that
I think you need to pursue writing full time.
That's what I'm seriously thinking about doing.
Like the joy and happiness when you were describing the characters and the depth. The fact that, you wrote the book so you can remember all their names, but you're into it. I dig it. I can appreciate that. It's like when Jack is talking about his, the Terminalist series. You can just, it like kind of glows out of him. Which is creepy given his pedophile beard and shit haircut.
That's what you call a pedophile beard?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I saw his face in a mugshot, it was like this man was a pedophile, I'd be like, God damn it, Jack. But I kind of knew. He's not a pedophile. I'm just saying his beard makes him look like he should be driving an ice cream truck down by the river, luring kids in with lollipops. So...
Well, I gave him copies of that book and The Death of Night at the book sign. I said, here, for free, just someday I want some feedback. Just want to know what you think. Yeah.
He'll give it to you. He actually, I have seen him go out of his way to sit down and talk with authors, much like authors took the time to sit down and talk with him. He definitely is a pay it forward type of person.
Well, I definitely got that impression when I interacted with him. He's a phenomenal writer too. In fact, The Terminal List, when I bought it, was one of the best books I'd read in a long time. A very unique plot.
Yeah.
The way he scanned out. Of course, I've already watched the series on Amazon.
What'd you think of it? I haven't seen it.
I thought it was pretty good.
Cool.
Chris Pratt did a good job. He really did.
Yeah, for like a C-grade actor. I mean, not bad. I mean, George is a B- writer, so it is what it is. We've been at this for 2.5 hours. I will let you close it out. What do you want to, closing thoughts? Did we miss anything?
Oh, God. Well,
we covered a lot. I mean, we
did.
talked about the intelligence world. We talked about aliens. We hypothesized a little bit about what their intent may be. We talked about the writing. I mean, I leave it up to you.
Well, I'll just say, if any of the fine folks that are listening to this, they get my books, I guarantee they won't be disappointed. They're totally unique. Now, I don't know what they're going to think of me after they read the books. They might want to institutionalize me for all I know.
That's actually a selling point for me. If somebody would have pitched a book like that, I'd be like, oh, I'm definitely checking that out.
Oh, good. Even better. But there's that. And then I guess the other thing I would say is for all the guys who served over there in Afghanistan with us, before us, after us, I know it hurts. It does. I guess I've kind of gotten at peace with it. Never thought I'd ever find myself saying that or thinking the things that I think. And yes, inexplicable that we could have made the same mistakes over and over again, but we did.
Yeah.
But for those of us who are in our demographic that want to go into either politics or the foreign policy realm, I would say if you want to do your part to make sure we don't make these mistakes again, absolutely, bar none, you have got to immerse yourself in the history of the British Empire and the Roman Empire especially. You've got to really get down in the nitty-gritty and study your military history because all the answers are there.
Perfect ending. Thank you for taking the time to come up to Montana.
Oh, sir, I sincerely appreciate you having me on.
If you call me sir again, I'm going to slap you. My name is Andy.
Sorry, I know I'm talking to a superior officer, so it kind of old habits.
First off, superior is not a correct word, and I was like barely an officer. The fact that I got commissioned is just proof that the military advancement system is fucking broken, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.